think you were majoring in South Indian history at Columbia University.
So I did Mughal and Ottoman history at Columbia. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, so we just had a major like we had the history major, and then you could kind of specialize in whatever regions or time periods that you um wanted. But yeah, and then I feel like
Because
I
I know
chose
you studied, is that overseas? Was it in South Africa from memory?
yeah, South
Or
Africa. Yeah, good
is it
memory,
Deoband?
good memory and good eye. So Deoband is in India, but it's a sub branch of Deoband. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I heard because I have a close friend who's a student knowledge. She was telling me even the Deoband in South Africa is really good, apparently. Like
Yeah,
the
so
facilities and stuff.
yeah, I mean, they're definitely better than India and Pakistan. Just because the Indian Gujarati Muslims are just extremely wealthy. They're kind of the like one of the wealthiest groups in South Africa, and because of that, and most of the wealthy Muslims are very religious vis-a-vis Tablighi Jamaat or Tasawwuf. So because of that, because you have Deen and the kind of Ahlul Rizq. Now that's trickled down to the Madaris. So because of that, you have these people who have now engaged the idea of waqf and sadaqa jariyah, and that's manifested in the kind of numerous amounts of madrasas, the deep level of scholarship, the facilities of these Madaris, the quality of teachers. So they're able to bring kind of scholars who are truly dedicated and not, not like typical Western diaspora where it's always like we're just kind of um, we just we just engage with the card that we're dealt with.
I heard, I guess the more Deoband side of things, because I was watching, like friends have told me, but it just struck me because I was watching an interview Mufti Menk was on, and he mentioned that, because I think he's like studied in Saudi, studied in India, so he's got a grasp of like studying around the world, and he was just like, oh, um, I forgot what he said Saudi taught him, but he said what I remember is like he said when he was studying India, it taught him like discipline, I guess, from the Deobandis from memory. Because I know he has a more Deobandi background, so it's just talking about like discipline and strictness. Would you say that's the case when you're like in South Africa?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that was the toughest thing coming, being born and raised in California to um, a family that wasn't necessarily that part of strand of Islam, and to deal with that. But yeah, um, to historicize that. So yeah, I mean it was super strict. Like we had roll call after Fajr and Isha and Asr sometimes every single day, and they would lock the door. So not only did they have roll call, but if you were late to prayer with Jamaat, with congregation, they would lock the doors to ensure that people wouldn't come at the end of Jamaat, but would come at the beginning. So not only did you have to worry about roll call, but you also had to worry about coming early to the prayers. And then people who missed prayers, it was like the punishments. You had to stand up, sometimes kicked out of class. If you came late, you got kicked out of class. There was no like talking in class. Talking in class got in trouble. If you
Oh
came late
wow.
from the holidays, got in trouble. No phones. No really going. We only had one day off a week, just Friday, and even then, our off was from Thursday after Asr till Friday Asr. But even then, there's still roll calls happening after Fajr and after Jummah and after Asr on those Fridays. So you can't really leave. Yeah, so like no cell phones, no really outside connection. So like let alone like laptops or anything like that. And strict dress code. So just white shalwar kameez, obviously above your ankles. Beard has to be fist length. Kids have been expelled for trimming their beards below the fist length.
Oh really? Well,
Yeah.
so
So and like that's just the kind of that's that's just like the tip of the iceberg for kind of the rules that we had to essentially engage. And but it's also really interesting if you look at like the history of Deoband and how it emerged in the 19th century. It's definitely like an anti-modernity, and its stances definitely anticipated Orientalism in like a lot of different multifaceted ways. But there definitely can be. I feel like there definitely can be there something can definitely be said about the links between Victorian discipline and Deobandi discipline, like
so
Victorian prep
that's
school discipline. Yeah,
well,
and because
uh,
pre-modernity, what you would have you wouldn't necessarily have these large scale institutions. You did have kind of major, like in Mughal South Asia, you had Madrasa Rahimiyya in Delhi, which is where Shah Waliullah and his father taught. Farangi Mahal in Lucknow, these different places, or even in where Imam Ghazali studied Nizamiya. But
Mm.
the central way of studying was that you would just go to different scholars, right? It was a lot more democratic. It was a lot more
Yeah.
fluid in the way that you would just kind of, I would go and study fiqh in Lahore. I would go study hadith in, Chittagong. I would go study Arabic in Delhi. I would go study Persian in Agra, like that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
it, it allowed for this kind of like much more universal way of understanding our tradition as opposed to just learning from like one school in one city where everyone is holed up in one place. It kind of, it, it prohibits from seeing this kind of multiplicity within Islam.
SubhanAllah. Like, I just to kind of add in my thoughts, would you say like that sort of a I guess approach in Deobani, South Africa, or just I guess that strictness that you're talking about, do you think it's beneficial? Because like to take them more, because I come from perhaps more of a four temperaments background. Like there's different temperament types that probably would struggle in such a strict environment. Like to memory would be more sanguine and choleric, whereas more melancholic and phlegm, they'll tend to be a bit more easier. They'll be able to transition into those environments a lot easier. So I guess for some it's like really difficult, and for others it was like it isn't too much of an issue. So like, what's your sort of like take on that sort of angle, in the sense of, do you think it's kind of fruitful that everyone should undergo that sort of study to perhaps for in the sense of growth, or would you say that maybe it's not for everyone kind of thing? Like, what's your sort of take on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely not. I would never replicate that experience in any country. I don't think that's necessary at all. Especially with kids, dude. Like, imagine like I'm kind of like my mom came to Chicago in like the '60s. Like we've been here for like two, three generations, and like for me, I was the first person to go and pursue like higher Islamic education, within even like extended family, and like um to even like go there and like see, and I mean they are democratic, that they don't care where you're from, but I think that hurts them to a fault, because like a kid who's coming from India, or a kid who's coming from America, not that you should treat people differently, but like there are going to be different expectations, right? Like you can't just be like, yo, um if you're late to class, like you're gonna be kicked out of class, right? Like we're not used to that, or even like
Yeah.
the way that they would kind of expend punishments. Like we had like the all white uniform thing, and um or they wouldn't allow the heaters on except in like extremely like kind of weird scenarios in which it was like depressingly cold. So for us who come from those places of comfort, to come there and find a sweet experience, and like to
Yeah.
give up all of that. And like, this is not to say that like mujahada isn't part of our deen, right? Like the famous Sufi saying, what is it? Al mushahada bil mujahada, that witnessing the divine reality comes through effort and strained circumstances. But like, I think a lot of it was unnecessary, because there's like the living aspect, but then there's also like the kind of pedagogical aspect where um, like you're kind of, I just graduated last year from this madrasa. So like I was 25, and it's like for example, like it was winter and you're only allowed to wear all white, but I wore like gray sweatpants instead of like a white shalvar. And
Yeah.
like my Abu Dawood teacher, which is like the six books of hadith that we do in our final year, the Sahih Sitta, and he told me to leave class and change and then come back, and then kind of like crucified me in front of everyone for that. And I was just like, dude, like this is so arbitrary. Like I was wearing, so like gray is still allowed, but like I was wearing dark gray, and like to make such a big deal, and like,
Subhanallah.
yeah, and like
Yeah.
to make such a big deal, but at the same time, like I don't want to sell them short, because like the education that I saw there was something that was like unrivaled. Like when I went to Columbia in New York, like I saw kids who were doing PhDs, having studied Arabic for 6 years, and their level was about a second or third year student in the Deobandi Madrasa, if I'm being generous.
Subhanallah.
Yeah, like their knowledge
Wow.
of sarf, nahu, balagha, al all of it was extremely poor. They had the only thing I'd say, they had better conversational skills, like they could say, like they could just speak fluently, but like Deoband has never, or even traditional Arabic study in Ajami lands or non-Arab lands, has never been about speaking, right? Like the utility was like, how do you interpret classical texts and assimilate yourself within this genealogy of Islam? It wasn't about like, what is the material utility of learning that language, right? So there's a shift. and how do we learn languages that kind of emerges in modernity, but that wasn't necessarily present. And I could talk about that for a long time, just because when I was in Madrasa, we had a lot of kids who were not Desi, and because Deoband is heir, right, to the Mughal tradition of teaching and learning, so the sweep of languages that are important to the Mughal, so Arabic, Urdu, Persian, are also emphasized by us, and all of our classes past the second year are strictly in Urdu. Even in second year, most of our classes are only in Urdu. So all the non-Arab kids and the non-Arab, or sorry, not the non-Desi kids, and they predominated in the classroom. So we had kids in my graduating class from 42 different countries, and only India, Pakistan are the only two countries that they would be Urdu speaking. And so we had Bengalis, we had Filipinos, we had Malaysians, we had Thai, we had Tanzanians, we had Kenyans, we had Nigerians, South Africans, Zimbabweans, Mozambicans, Americans, Brits,
Mashallah.
French, Spanish, Jordanian, Palestinian, but and they all had to learn Urdu. They all had to learn Urdu because past the third year we only have senior teachers teach who are from India and Pakistan, or only from India actually, and they're only teaching in Urdu, and they all learn Urdu. But that complaint, they would come and be like, "Why are we learning Urdu if Arabic is the language of our revelation, and the language and the liturgical language of Islam?" But and they were like, well, and then after graduation, they would all say oh, I want to go spend a year at Azhar so I can pick up how to speak Arabic. And I was like, I mean, you're you're getting a deep kind of linguistic and fiqh knowledge of the language, so the idea that I need to learn a language so I can speak it is a weird new modern way of looking at a language. And it was sad because our teachers, they knew that it was the case, that speaking, even though my teachers had been, they were masters of Arabic, right? They had written Arabic texts. They had been learning they had been reading, writing, and teaching in Arabic for 60 years, but a lot of them still couldn't speak because for them it just wasn't important, right? It was for me, Arabic is not a language that I care about manifesting to Arabs that I know the language, but it was about hey, I want to be part of this tradition that links back to the Prophet, and that's the most important thing for them. So for them, even modern Arabic, being able to read Al Jazeera in Arabic, or be hosted by, what's the Egyptian host name? Forget his name, but none of that was important, as opposed to when I was doing postgrad, when I was doing Arabic classes at Columbia, just to see how it was, and it was his fifth year Arabic class. For them it was a strictly material utility, right? Going on to government agencies, going on to the foreign service, or a research language, but for a larger purpose of, getting an academic degree. But that spiritual epistemic relationship that was kind of preserved in Deoband and other traditional Muslim circles that are not Arab.
That's actually super insightful. The fact that I think it was even because I was before this episode, I was kind of stalking your Facebook profile, and you actually shared an article about, I guess, how our Islam is being shaped in the modern times. For example, Zakir Naik videos, all of that had an impact. Ahmed Deedat and rational arguments, etc., that may not have been how Islam was represented back in more olden times. And then how you're talking about now, how I guess what's happened is that Arabic is being used as a means in a more even though yes, we're saying we're doing it for Islam and stuff, but it's kind of being used in a more Western way, in the sense of talking to people, and it just kind of it's about the ends kind of thing, if that makes sense. But it seems like what you're trying to talk about is that's the situation where we just want to talk with people that may have been a bit more foreign to perhaps the more traditional scholars within Islam, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, this is actually a huge point of debate when the Tsarist Russians in the 18th century kind of take over Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, and obviously, as you know, their rich tradition of Madaris there extend back for 800 to 900 years, and they essentially write these critiques of pedagogy within Muslim Madaris, and they say that these Turks or these Uzbeks or these Tajiks only learn Arabic for the purpose. First, to make the critique that they only learn it by rote, so that they're learning these grammar manuals of sarf and nahu by rote memorization without. Their argument is they don't truly understand it, but that's not true. But they had that first critique, and the second critique was that they don't have a utilitarian approach with Arabic. and
Mm.
it's this new way of looking at languages, right? That like for the 18th century traditional Bukhari Madrasa way of learning Arabic is no longer um, a proper way of learning a language, right? Because it's not done in this materially useful way. Because in Russia, you're learning Arabic or you're learning Persian for the purpose of serving in these kind of colonial capacities, right? Serving as Russian or Tsarist servants and in Tsarist Uzbekistan, or trading with the Ottomans. So it's like it has to have this material value, right? Like that's why, yeah. Sorry,
Subhanallah.
I didn't mean to go on this weird tangent.
No, no, no. That's it's a good tangent. It's a very beneficial tangent. Like, sorry, just to slightly go off topic though. Like, would you say that, like, because you've gone into those madrasas and done the studying, would you say that, like, to what degree would you say, like, perhaps colonialism or maybe even whiteness has kind of seeped into the ways of how we learn the tradition?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting because I went to madrasa and then I went to college. So I did this alim course and then I went to college, and it's for me it was really uplifting because in madrasa we don't really engage with critical theory, right? Like we're just taught, you know, वो जो फरंगी लोग वो बद कौम है, right? Like the Europeans, they're an evil people, but like, what does that mean, right? So we're just kind of like taught, like in creative writing, we're always taught this principle of like show, don't tell, right? Like when you write, don't say he was happy, show why he was happy. But like we were never shown that like what was wrong, and like I feel like our teachers, they had their hearts in the right places, but they just couldn't really articulate the concept of like Orientalism or like an Asadian genealogy of secularism. But they had their priorities in the right place, like understanding what it means to preserve an epistemic relationship of Islam. But yeah, I mean, coming back to in college, um, I mean, Columbia being a place where Edward Said taught and till he eventually passed away in 2002, 2003. And so he developed this like really robust department of post-colonial studies. Even though he himself taught in the English lit department, but because of that, other students were attracted to him. Joseph Mas'ad, Rashid Khalidi, Wa'il Halaq, Sudipta Kaviraj, Chatterjee, all these kind of different theorists. But yeah, no, I mean, there's no doubt that colonialism has definitely shaped and reshaped Islam, if and only because of the kind of reframing of the Sharia, right? So there's this kind of multi-pronged approach. Also, stop me if I'm kind of going on a different tangent, or if I'm not directly answering your question. I have a lot of thoughts about this, so I can be kind of scattered when
No,
I
go for
articulate
it.
it.
Like, take your time. We got depends on how long you got. Like, if you got like 2 hours or so, I'm cool with that. So go for it, inshallah.
Yeah, I don't know if people like listening to 2 hour podcasts though, right? Or I don't know. I mean, like you're the expert here, but I was gonna say that yeah, I mean, so like being a Milana and then kind of understanding like what it means to like have like your own role kind of reduced by this kind of colonial secular enterprise that like undercuts the role of the scholars, right? So like in the pre-colonial Muslim world, you had the text, you had the scholar, and then you obviously had political authority, and all of them kind of worked. And obviously there were other elements, but I would say these are kind of the same stuff. I hope there are obviously people who are much more knowledgeable about this and can correct me. But essentially, but what changes? Let's say, so let's take Warren Hastings, right? He's this East India Trading Company servant in Bengal, who's working in Fort Williams in Calcutta, 18th century, master of Persian, Arabic, English, Latin, wrote like a Persian manual, translated Al Hidayah, which is the kind of centerpiece um, of Hanafi mutun. And well, it's not a matan, it's more sharah, because the sharah al bidayah. But translate Siraji, which is an inheritance manual. But what changes, kind of essentially, and this is just one amongst many changes that we can kind of detail. But one change, let's say, is that he no longer requires the authority of a mufti, right? So what's now happening is that Islamic law, under these East India Trading Company courts in Bengal, this undivided Bengal, obviously not the Bengal division that we know today. This is, from Calcutta to Saleeh to even Assam. And what happens is that instead of this robust way of of you have scholars, you have the mufti, you have the text, you have this robust kind of sanad, or chain that links back between scholars and tradition. And so time itself, So we can think about the kind of like Walter Benjamin conception of time, and like how there's something called empty time, or there's something called ethical time. And we can think about how the pre-colonial ulama worked in a different temporality, right? They conceived of time and space in completely different terms, contrary to our modern sensibilities of time and place. But essentially, that Warren Hastings in the 18th century, law or Hanafi law was no longer being radically interpreted from a mufti's lens or a judge's lens. What was happening is that the judge was now required to only issue rulings from Hidayah, which is just like a 12th century text, not realizing that the text was constantly being retooled, reframed, reanalyzed, reinterpreted. And it was a manual and it was a guide, sure, but like nobody, and even when when we were doing Hidayah, because Hidayah has always been a centerpiece of like Hanafi learning, whether it's Ottoman Anatolia, Central Asia, or South Asia, or even in Iraq, in Hanafi parts of Iraq, as well as Hanafi parts of Syria, as well as in Egypt. Nobody would have ever said to, hey, just reading this manual, you can issue fatwa from this book, because a lot of those opinions are not muftabihi. They're not the most certified opinion in the madhab. They're part of the purpose of reading that text is to kind of is to gain faqaha, or is to gain legal understanding of how your madhab or how your school of thought operates. But what happens in the 18th century is that no longer happens, and so the relationship between the mufti and the text and the people gets severed, right? Because now the British want to treat law in the same way that Western British law, which is derived from common law, which is derived from Roman law, happens, right? Where you have just the text. Same thing happens with the way that, and that's why you have the rise of Salafis, right? Because Salafis are essentially kind of drawing on some of these same ideas, right? They just go back to the Bible. It's just back to the Bible complex, right? So the Salafis are like, we have to go back to the text. We essentially cutting off this 12 centuries of rich and robust tradition and learning and scholarship, right? So which is what Protestantism actually is, right? Martin Luther is like, we need to cut out the clergy. We need to cut out this kind of rich body of Christian scholarship, and all of us need to be individual interpreters of the Bible.
SubhanAllah. That was actually like very insightful in the sense, like, because I've done like episode with other brothers who may be for the more kind of conservative crowd may be deemed as modernist, in the sense of, you know, they're trying to understand modernity and sort of wield perhaps laws within the Sharia to, I guess, the modern times, and that's kind of seen as controversial because you're not kind of, I don't know, following the Quran and Sunnah or like the previous kind of text. Like, to give like a quick example, one of the examples I gave, because in Hanafi fiqh, like, it's a bit stricter for women to go to the masjid, for example. I'd be correct in saying that, right? Yes.
So yeah, I mean, like, I can contextualize that, but I will say that like the fatwa of my teachers in America, my Deobandi teachers, is that women should definitely come to the masjid, and that fatwa was issued in an environment when homes were actually spaces of learning in which Islamic education was widely disseminated, and you had this kind of circulatory system. But since that no longer is in place, I, as a mufti in training, or any other muftis, my senior muftis, would give a fatwa that women should absolutely come to the masjid.
Some may kind of interpret that as, because because my kind of point is like, some people look at the, like what you said, I don't know, like centuries ago rulings, and then kind of say that, okay, you need to follow that ruling. And because like, and the example that I gave is that, because like my sister, right, like my family is not necessarily like in the sort of like, they're alhamdulillah like conservative and practicing, but not to perhaps degree that involves her sort of gaining sort of Islamic knowledge. So I'm just like, the only way for her to kind of get that is to actually go to the masjid, right? Because, you know, time and place, this is like a very unique situation. You know what I mean? So that's the point. So some people will be like, no, but you're not following the Hanafi kind of ruling, and perhaps people listening this will think like, no, he's not following the Hanafi ruling. So I guess the point I'm trying to make, the broader point, is that I guess the context kind of may dictate the rulings at times, and what you're kind of saying is that, look, we tend to kind of just look at rulings in the past where perhaps it wasn't even meant to be looked at in that manner, but it just happens to be like that at the current times.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So like, and the thing that we do while we're training to be muftis is that Ibn Abidin, who's this 18th century Ottoman mufti, he's working in Damascus. Muhammad Amin Ibn Abidin wrote this a magisterial commentary called Hashiyat al-Tahtawi, or we call it Shami. And in this text, he talks about more specifically women coming to the graveyard. And he cites this debate, this really robust debate between like whether women should come to the graveyard. Some scholars are like, no, there's fitna. Also, they're kind of involved. Sometimes women, and this is talking about Syrian, I guess Syria, what's going on in Syria, that sometimes women come and do this noha, which is like this paid mourning for the deceased. But then these scholars are like, look, if we say that, hey, like now even like the righteous woman shouldn't go to the graveyard, you're essentially saying that we're gonna compromise the graveyard to the innovators or to the people who are committing wrong at these graveyards. So we should not do that, right? And then always cites a bunch of hadiths where the Prophet والسلام, does essentially give permission for women to visit graveyards. But it's like, yeah, this is like the debate that it's like, hey, a mufti, and this is a condition for someone who's training to be a mufti, is that arifun bi ahwali zamanihi, that he has to be cognizant or aware of the conditions of his time. A fatwa from Aleppo can't be unqualifiedly applied in Damascus. A fatwa from Delhi cannot be unqualifiedly applied in Hyderabad. You know, like it's like there are different populations
Yeah,
and there are
yeah.
different judges, and which is why fatwa, unfortunately, in modernity, because we've lost kind of our the hakim al-shar'iyya or the sharia courts, we've lost the kind of differentiation between a judge and a mufti. But in pre-modernity and even in part of modernity, we know for a fact that fatwa were never supposed to be binding. Fatwa were never supposed to be binding. They're essentially they're analogous to juridical counsel. So like a judge in a Western legal court, he has legal counsel that he can look at that's kind of articulated by expert Western jurists, but then he himself makes that decision. But because we no longer necessarily have authority. I mean, we do have judges, but like it's not in the same way as in pre-modernity. So therefore, we don't necessarily see that a fatwa is not binding. It's just it's juridical counsel, it's legal counsel from a mufti, because the mufti does not necessarily have the legal or political capacity to enforce that.
It's actually pretty promising where I guess now like it's refreshing to see that I guess people like yourself are really sort of aware, or even you have that sort of I guess your institution that you're coming from as well, they've actually propagated, you know, sort of a sort of more rethinking or more kind of a type of a sort of, it might sound bad, but like a type of Islam that's sort of fit for this kind of day and age. You get what I
Yeah,
mean? So it's
yeah,
kind of
no, and
refreshing to get that.
yeah, no, and it's like tough because it's like, because typically people who talk about like, oh, we need to make Islam fit for today, or we need to make Islam relevant, are typically those people who just want to copy paste Western modernity to Islam, right? But like saying that, hey, we need to make sure that Islam is something that contends with today is not necessarily a blasphemous statement. It's just that the typical advocates of that are those people who had no knowledge of Islam, right? Had no deep understanding of the tradition, historically, legally, theologically, sociologically, anthropologically, metaphysically. They were products of Western secular institutions. I mean, I also am a graduate of a Western secular institution, but I also spent, this is my 12th year in a traditional madrasa, going on to my 13th year. So like,
Well,
so when you have people who don't have a deep understanding of this, like when Irshad Manji or Anhar Saleeh said that we need to reform Islam or make it relevant, typically it's been those people who don't have a deep knowledge of Islam, right? Like if you don't know how Islam has been practiced historically, what how a Sharia court operated, how a Mufti operated, how the Sultan and the Mufti and the Qadi, how they all interacted, how poets themselves interacted with, in this matrix. So yeah, no, I mean, like I think it is promising. I will say that like most of my, and this is not meant to be a diss. My classmates were wonderful people, but it's like obviously I was blessed because I came from enough privilege that I could attend a Western secular institution that had this pedagogy of post-colonial theory. Otherwise, like, yeah, I mean, it's really tough to articulate stuff because Western critical theory is really dense, and if you don't have proper teachers or experts to guide you through it, you'll never understand. But I think like as more of us who kind of learn how Western modernity itself operates, because I don't think there's anything shameful in that, because Imam Ghazali himself learned how Greek philosophy worked or Aristotelian philosophy worked before he critiqued it. And like you have to understand what you're dealing with, right? Like every single Muslim majority country, or every single Muslim population is kind of implicated within Western modernity, right? So like now it's Muhammad Iqbal, the great Indian Persian poet, said that the greatest task before us, and he says this in his Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam, a series of lectures that he delivered throughout pre-partition India in the 20s and 30s. But he said that the greatest task that confronts us is that how do we ensure that we have our foundation of Islam that endures, but also kind of ensuring that Islam does not fall within the kind of secular epistemology of Western modernity. And I'm butchering the words there, but that was the kind of sense that I got from it. But yeah, so we need to essentially ensure that like we have our madaris, but we don't need to reform their curriculum. As someone who has gone through the traditional Deobandi, and like my madrasa was stricter than Darul Uloom Deoband itself. I have friends who went to Darul Uloom Deoband in UP and came back, and we would share madrasa experiences, and my madrasa was way stricter, and in terms of anything that you can think of. But I will say like that curriculum needs to stay. Like that is a tested and true method of how to impart deen, and I would never, after all that Talal Asad or Wa'il Halaq or Jonathan Brown or any other Western academic I've read, like that education is absolutely critical to our subjectivity as a Muslim.
Have you got like sort of backlash, perhaps in the sense of like what they've what a certain camp might do is like, okay, just to sort of be a bit more skeptical in the sense that you're perhaps using works of Edward Said or maybe even Frantz Fanon to sort of dictate your sort of where Islam should be at. You get what I mean? So using sort of maybe frameworks or even epistemologies that are more, could be argued, foreign to Islam, and using it to sort of shape your Islam and even your Islamic rulings that may be perhaps deemed as problematic. You get what I mean?
Yeah, no.
Have you ever got that?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, welcome, Salam. Yeah, so that's Josh. He's just tuned in.
Sorry I'm late to chime in, Saleeh. I'm just having some technical issues. But I've been listening, just getting my mic to work. In that vein, in a lot of your stories and your posts, I actually see you're quite critical of Western philosophy, like to the point of being dismissive. I'm not saying that's wrong. That's probably the right approach. But it's sort of, how do you marry that with sort of Western philosophical tools? Even say something like Foucault, which really helps you understand a lot of the discourses and stuff in society. How do you sort of negotiate all of that? Because I'm not too sure like how much you borrow from that sort of stuff to understand the deen and the world, and where you draw that line.
So this is kind of off what I was saying, asking.
Yeah,
building
based on what Tez was saying.
Wait, so can you, if I understand your question correctly, you're asking that how do I negotiate or reconcile using Western philosophy with Islam?
Yeah.
So I think I use it in as much as that it doesn't contradict like the epistemological foundations of Islam, or even what we call tanqid in Arabic, or critique. As long because my main purpose when I read Western philosophy is just to essentially understand the structures of Western philosophy, right? To understand what is discursivity, like what is a discourse, right? To use Foucault in that vein. But as soon, and which is why, like, otherwise, because like, as you guys would know, as well as me, or probably even more than me, that like, if you don't have an ethical impetus or an ethical bounding or a structural bounding, you can get lost in leftist critical theory. And like, I've seen that happen to people, right? Where like your only metaphysics is essentially that whatever new theory emerges and whatever new critiques come. And so I just use my foundation of just kind of Hanafi Islam as like my way of like, look, hey, here is how Western modernity operates in some. I'm definitely going to need Western discourse to understand it structurally. And so therefore, which is why it is useful. I definitely do think that there is some value in that. There's no doubt that like, and you're right, like there is no Orientalism from Sa'id without Foucault, right? There's no, I don't necessarily think
Yeah.
there is a Wa'al Halak without Edward Said. So it all kind of connects back, and and obviously Edward Said is the product of literary theory, and like how does that all come together? But yeah, no, I think it is useful, but this is the key point, that you have to have an ethical impetus, right? And like I'm not saying that I necessarily do that well, or I do that all the time, but like that's what I have in mind. That like here are the basic principles of Islam that like I'm going to bound myself by, right? Just analytically, like here are some things that I'm not going to compromise on. But in as much as understanding how Western modernity has reshaped Islam in the past 230 years, I think it is valuable, and like we do need to kind of understand it to an extent, and sometimes that can only be possible, in my view. Other people might disagree, that sometimes you do have to understand it kind of within its own internal logic.
Because just to give you an idea, like that sort of discussion is sort of new to Australia and Sydney.
Mm-hmm.
So people are very critical of using, I don't know, the postmodernists or any of that sort of language. It's very like Salafi-ish sort of mindset. It's black and white. So people are very like, whenever you use language that seems academic or different, people are like, whoa, that's the wrong epistemology. You should use that. And they're very reluctant to bring on new ideas, to look at our history, even Orientalism and stuff like that. It took a long time to be accepted. Whereas I think in the US, it's sort of the opposite. Everyone's very critical and borrows too much from these sort of ideas.
Right. Yeah. No. I think you bring up a really valid point. But like, a lot of people don't know this, but Ibn Taymiyyah was someone who understood Greek logic in and of itself, and which is why he could write a rad against them.
Yeah.
Right. And so, I mean, Ibn Taymiyyah, he was a Hanbali. I wouldn't say he was a Salafi. That's weird anachronisms applied to him. But he is not he's not someone who shied away from that. But like, I think, which is why like you have to explain that. Look, hey, well, first of all, cite these examples from the past: Imam Ghazali, Ibn Taymiyyah, Shah Waliullah, different brilliant scholars of our heritage, rahimahumullah ta'ala wa aqtalallahu qabrahum. But we still I think as long as our principles aren't being violated, which is why it demands a critical study of our own tradition, which is why I was telling Tanzim earlier that like we need to ensure that like that tradition is still safeguarded, because again, a lot of people who are reading or like a lot of the Muslims in my classes at Columbia or at U Chicago now are not people who necessarily, they are, I would say U Chicago is probably a little bit better, not to do a disservice to anyone, but like sometimes, if you don't have a knowledge of the tradition, you're going to be lost in that, because you don't have a base, right? You don't have something to gravitate you back to something. And so like your base, your metaphysics will inevitably align with postmodernism. And like, that's where it becomes problematic. But also like that hesitation that you might find from some scholars, I don't know if they're Salafi or Deobandi or Brelvi or XYZ, but also I also do understand where they're coming from, because like as you guys have read, like Orientalism has been going on for 230 years. Like Muslim scholars, both Sunni and Shi'i, when they confronted this phenomenon of like these Western scholars studying Islam and like low key kind of reframing it in this like weird imperial way, they didn't know how to articulate a critique against it, but they knew that it was wrong, right? And like, so I feel like that's why that hesitation is there, because they saw like they were physical witnesses to that reality of, we also are, but I feel like for them, like they were the first people to encounter it, and so therefore like that hesitation has also endured, and that
I feel like it's a very sort of sensitive or tenuous sort of hesitation, that it still very much exists in sort of, say, back home, like we're from Bangladesh, this sort of like reaction against anything modern. It's sort of struck down as sort of being haram, or like, for example, my dad used to tell me back in the 60s and 70s, the ulama or the popular, imams and stuff, they would say cameras are haram, just anything that was coming through that was new Western technology. And that sort of harks back to, I guess, even Ottoman scholars, the printing press, they were reluctant to take that on, just new technologies. And that's sort of, I don't know what the more liberal sort of Muslims use as a counterpoint. They're like, oh, look, Islam's never been accepting
Right.
of anything new, and they sort of use that to sort of beat us down. If you get what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I remember when I was like 10 or 11, and we went to like one of my great uncle's house, and I come from a very militantly secular family, except for my father, who somehow ended up in Tablighi Jamaat. So, and
Oh, yeah.
so my father is Tablighi, but other than that, my whole family is militantly secular. So like, yeah, like when I told them that I wanted to go to South Africa to become a Maulana, it was like it was just like sheer horror of like what happened to this kid. And like a lot of weird like Islamophobic Orientalist jokes of like Taliban, and like really classist stuff too, of like of that like only poor people in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh become ulama. If you truly have a future, you would never do this. Why are you throwing your life away? Like that kind of stuff. And I was like, but then like all their kids just end up going to college and just like being drunk the whole time. So I was like, yeah, I don't know. So,
You know what your own kids are up to? Yeah.
yeah. So and like now, yeah. So I was like, I don't think I missed out on much. But yeah, no, I think.
Yeah, it's a sort of a reality they don't understand either, I guess. Yeah. Continue, sorry.
Yeah. So like, and I remember my great uncle. He was like, these Molvi Saabs, and now Molvi is obviously a pejorative term, sadly. But like, Rumi is convulsing in barzakh. But like, he was like, yeah, these Molvis don't. When the microphone came out, I think there was a debate about it. But like if anything, I feel like that hesitation is actually a product of like deep intellectual sophistication, where you're actually like super critical about stuff. So I don't get it. It's like either like we're these star-eyed Maulanas who are uncritical, or we're like way too critical. So it's like pick one. Like in fact, because even with coffee itself in the 15th or 16th century, as we know, it was harvested in Yemen, and Yemen was under Ottoman control, and so Ottoman coffee houses became a thing, maqahi, where janissaries would kind of come together, and that also became an issue because they would kind of like foment rebellion, and the leading authorities were like, we need to shut down these coffee houses. But like with Ottoman ulama, some of the ulama were like, is this okay? Because there's this kind of intoxicating effect of coffee, right? Like as we all know, that there's this, like your brain is kind of rewired with coffee, right? We say, are you wired, right? At least I don't know. I say that with my friends here, but like it's there was, I mean, obviously they realized that like it was totally harmless and it's completely fine, but like still, so like if anything, I feel like new technology and like ulama being hesitant about it is actually like a symbol of deep intellectual sophistication of our tradition, of this kind of safeguarding of our tradition, that like we're not going to uncritically accept anything. This is the deen in which our Prophet gave us, alayhi salatu wasalam. This is the deen that the Sahaba inherited. This is the deen that the Tabi'in and Tabi'in Tabi'in, and this is the deen that has given us izzah and place and maqam in this world. That so this is not something that we're going to
add. Yeah, sorry, just to cut you off there. No, because you had a really good point about, critical thinking, and the fact that I guess scholars are thinking about it, kind of emphasize that critical sort of tradition that we have. But to add, would you say, like, because I was having a chat with about this with one of my friends in a Hanafi fiqh thread that Josh, I think, is also on, and it was just the conversation about like cigarettes versus like fast food versus like even coffee. The fact that I guess what we sort of come to say now is that, okay, because of science and technology, some rulings are that cigarettes are haram because it's bad for your body and stuff, even though it was permitted before. Like that's kind of the rationale that's given, but then it's kind of in the same breath people are quick to be like, but nah, like fast food is like definitely halal, like what's wrong with that? But then to be honest, like even fast food is pretty unhealthy, it's pretty bad for your body, right? So argue that kind of it's a bit hypocritical. Would you say that like perhaps even maybe capitalism, the fact that even coffee is so widespread that we just kind of accept it as permissible, would you say that perhaps even we could go down the line of capitalism may be shaping our rulings? That's just a question that I just had a thought, because for me it's like if cigarettes are destroying you, then why on fast food? Yeah, exactly. Why is fast food? You got it.
Yeah, sorry. When I was interrupting you, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I was just like excited about that thought, because that was something I've been thinking about the past 2 months. But it was like like the reason why marijuana is haram is because it intoxicates you, right? It changes your state of mind, and it's doing qiyas on alcohol. But cigarettes don't cause intoxication, right? You're not losing your senses in the way that you're doing with marijuana or alcohol. So as ulama begin to essentially pick up on scientific trends, I feel like soon, within the next couple of years, we're going to get a fatwa that fast food will never be haram, because it's tough to prove something as haram, at least in the Hanafi madhab, because our principle is that everything is halal unless said otherwise by the Sharia, which is Allah or the Quran or the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam. It essentially could become makruh in the near future. And I think as our ulama kind of delve into STEM, we're gonna see that fatwa. But I think in terms of capitalism shaping fatwa, I think because we ulama have not done a good job, not to their blame, because as secular modernity uprooted traditional Islamic education, we needed to ensure that we emphasized on something. Otherwise, we were going to lose the tradition, which is why even in Deoband, the ma'qulat, or the rational sciences, get de-emphasized, which is to the kind of lessening of our scholarship. But because it was like, hey, the ma'qulat, the secular university is taking care of that, we need to ensure that we still safeguard the manqulat. But I think as ulama get a deeper grasp of capitalism, which they are, we're gonna see rulings change, right? That hey, this is something that harms people, right? And harm dararu yuzalu, as the great Hanafi or as the Hanafi maxim goes, right? That harm needs to be removed, right? And if this is kind of pushing towards the suffering of poor people and the widespread of this unjust economic system, this does need to be challenged. And there's nothing wrong with saying that an unjust economic system needs to be challenged, right? Because unfortunately, sometimes, and with my Mufti teacher Sheikh Amin, who is definitely on the front lines of this kind of project of keeping us in the past as well as contending with modernity as a senior Mufti. He was talking about, I want to give this example again. If I'm going off the rails, you guys should steer me back. But he was talking about when what is it called when someone is near death but they want to be killed, euthanasia. So he was talking about how the idea that when people go brain dead, that they should essentially be killed so that they could be harvested, so that their organs could be harvested, right? For a capitalist impulse of harvesting and research and medical production and that stuff. I mean, research is not necessarily capitalism, but another capitalist impulse that he mentioned, and he was like, "Innamal a'malu binniyat," right? That the fact that that a person who is brain dead is pronounced as completely dead and taken off, right? Because istifta or questions come into the muftis, right? That I have a relative or I know someone who is on ICU. Should we take them off so that he or she can have an easier death and doesn't go through this difficulty? But then it's where did this impulse come from, right? Because in the Sharia, we always try to preserve human life in as much as possible. If a person is brain dead, is brought through the day of Arafah, or is brought through Arafah fi ayyam al-Hajj, in the days of Hajj, that person is considered a Haji. Even if he's brain dead, he still gets the reward of being a Haji. While being brain dead in ICU, he still gets rewards of enduring difficulty, of enduring testing and trials. So, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't be released or not, but I'm saying this is a discussion. There's some ideas that I've heard, but yeah.
Just to quickly go back to your previous point, Saleeh, I think it's I've never thought of it that way, where you said the fact that Muslims are hesitant to take on new things is actually a symbol of our sophistication in a way. Because I've always thought of it as somewhat of a, maybe I've just internalized it, but a sort of backwardness where we're just unable to adapt with the modern world. Not that I thought that, but that's what sort of always pushed on us.
Yeah, no, and it's so hard to escape that, because that rhetoric is all around us, from our parents, our institutions, right? The literature.
Yeah, and just compared to Western society, where they pick up anything new in a heartbeat, any new, even look at people's attitudes today to any app or new way of doing things. It's like their whole society is geared towards taking up new things, progress, innovation.
Right.
Whereas Islam, it's like the way you framed it was pretty profound. that's a testament to the fact that we have a certain way to live, and we're not just going to change that because of some new thing that comes around. For example, like I remember Sheikh Hamza
Yeah,
Yusuf
yeah,
once
yeah,
mentioning how the printing press with the Ottomans, the reason why they didn't want to take it on, and it's like just technology to proliferate books and stuff, right? Is because they didn't see it befitting that the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would be slammed down on a page.
yeah, yeah.
It should be handwritten to preserve it, if
Exactly.
you get what I
Yeah, yeah.
mean.
And there's this permeating sense of adab, but also like booksellers, copyists, scribes, their jobs would be lost. And the theology of progress that I'm sure you guys are familiar with, right? That is so central to post Enlightenment Western conception of itself. That we need to progress no matter the cost and whatever their conception of happiness is. And we can see the harms of that, right, dude? Like the Western world has taken control of the world and has possessed hegemony for the past 200, 300 years. And in just 200-300 years, we are on the brink of environmental destruction. Just 200 years of this secular way of living, right? That we need to adapt. We need to adapt because the long-term consequences to ethical, environmental, spiritual health were completely dismissed, right? Because of the Cartesian distinction between body and mind. So yeah, and it's like with Islam, it was always like, hey, first of all, what are our principles? What does it mean to be a Muslim? What does it mean to think, to live, to view, to prosper as a Muslim? All of these things are important because if it were not important and we were just meant to take it as it's supposed to go, Iqbal has this beautiful Persian couplet, one of the last ones that he wrote, where he goes, Ishq tamam Mustafa, aqal tamam Abu Lahab, that love or the supra rational way or supernatural way of love, that's all of Mustafa, peace and blessings upon him. And aqal tamam Abu Lahab, that your intellect, this kind of unfettered way of rationalizing the world, that's all from Abu Lahab. And then he says, Ba Mustafa barisa khishra kedi hamaus, agar una rasidi tamam bu lahabi. That rich Mustafa, for all of the religion is within him, peace and blessings upon him. But if you don't reach Mustafa, everything else is Abu Lahab, right? And like his
wow, that's
right,
crazy.
because his impulse is that, look, hey, if we were and Iqbal is making this point, may Allah have mercy on him, that if we were just supposed to adopt everything that we thought was good, then what was the point of prophet? Why did Allah send prophets? Right? If we could just use our aql to kind of determine what is good and what is not good, then like literally what is the point of prophet? Like what is the point of Allah choosing the best of his creation to lead and guide us towards hidayah? Right? Like the first page of Surah Baqarah, Hudal lil muttaqeen, that glad tidings to the people who have taqwa. Who are those people? Alladhina yu'minuna bil ghayb. The first condition, those people who believe in the unseen. And there's different tafasir that Qurtubi ibn Abbas give for this tafsir, but the kind of central exegesis of this verse is that those people who believe in the unseen. But the first thing is that we have to understand that we are believing in things that we don't have control over. Alif Lam Mim, we know that like these are huruf muqatta'at, or those letters that we don't understand, right? And so like we have to make that leap of faith, and we have to understand that there's prophetic guidance, and that we're only going to understand it much later, right? Like we can think about, dude, if the world had not been suffering under capitalism for the past 200 years, how different would the world have been? Right? Like how different would our conception of ourselves be? Would we have the same level of poverty? Would we have the same level of environmental destruction? I don't think the world would be suffering from climate change in the way that it is had capitalism and secularism not been at the forefront of our way of thinking and living in this world.
Yeah, 100%. It's just we can only like sort of imagine what it would be like if that sort of crazy drive for progress wasn't there. That's just destroyed everything. What I wanted to pivot back towards now, Saleeh, is sort of a question we had about sort of your social media fame, not fame really, but sort of your Instagram profile and sort of how we came to know you, and also Orientistan, and just for the audience to sort of give an overview of what you post about. You post about, it was things no one was really posting about, sort of like even the sort of because I was trying to explain to my friends, like, who is this guy we're interviewing? Like, is he like a sheikh or what is he? I was like, no, dude, he's an Instagram personality. And
that's unfortunate. My teachers would be so sad to hear that. Like, we spent 12 years on this kid, and now people don't even know him as a sheikh. He's just an Instagram dude.
That's how we know you. But the thing is, like, you're not like a big Dawa personality, but in terms of how impactful you've been, and I know you only have a few thousand followers on Instagram, but I have so many friends and relatives following you on Instagram. Just the fatwas you give or the fiqh you explain on your stories, and it's something different when it comes from you because you have that relatability to our generation, as in you sort of grew up in this era, so you know how to sort of speak and make it palatable or understandable. Like even some fatwa when it comes to like I don't know like tattoos or like something else that's modern, like you can break it down for people and be like, this is why it's haram and you shouldn't mutilate your bodies, etc. But like, as in, it's
Just to
never
add,
in sort of
sorry,
a
just to
fashion way.
add to that, Josh. Like even for me personally, like I guess I was actually having a chat with my other friend as well, who's following your page. I've been following it as well. It's just the fact that you you bring like that, not even just from the Islamic angle, it's all about culture as well. You relate, like you I remember like once even it was pretty crazy. Like I know you're more about, you know, Persian and Urdu and stuff, and then one time I think you posted, maybe Josh knows as well, like you posted Bangla version. I think it was a like a Maulana singing his love for Medina, but it was in Bangla.
Yeah,
And I actually mentioned this in a
Yeah.
previous episode.
yeah, it was a poem by Qazi Nazrul Islam. Yeah.
So I was like, I was
Yeah,
watching that
yeah.
story. I'm like, bro, like this is, whoa, this is insane. Like, what's? I didn't know this like part of Bangla existed. So it was like
Yeah.
amazing, like how it's about connecting both, like, you know, culture, Islam, you know, the modern age kind of thing. So that was beautiful. So that's just one sort of taste of, you know, what you sort of kind of you're giving on your kind of Instagram page as well.
Yeah, no, and like I was unfortunately because of modernity, the secular, like for example, like in the Arab world, like secular Arabs have kind of monopolized the idea of like literature and poetry. But if you look back in our past, dude,
Yeah.
the greatest poets, if it's in Mughal Bengal or Ottoman Palestine, they were all ulama. And if you look at like
Yeah.
major stars, singers like Kulthum from Egypt or Muhammad Abdul Wahab, these both of these people were children of imams, you know, and even some of these Bollywood lyricists, like Majrooh Sultanpuri, he was actually a graduate of a Deobandi Madrasa who ended up in Bollywood. Strange story, but yeah, I mean, I was just like, why do secular Muslims get a monopolized culture? Like this culture is a culture that like ulama, Indian, Bengali, Arab, Afghan, Iranian have spent their entire lives for 1400 years preserving. So like why did it essentially become the monopoly? Like who gave culture to the secular Muslim and to say that it was their right to articulate?
Yeah, and that was sort of the appeal with your Instagram page because you blended like a more relevant Islamic perspective with our traditional culture as well, which sort of like people really don't do in our generation. There's always this sort of like millennial Islamic, I don't know, like it's always very devoid of culture, how a lot of people try to bring Islam back and make it popular. But the way you have that cultural basis just made it like so much more authentic in a
Yeah,
way.
yeah.
And with your Instagram page, just to track onto how you got it started, did you have like a following in your community and you're like, wait, I should make this a bit more accessible, and then you sort of started posting a lot, or how did you bring it about?
Just by so I just had, you know, the typical kind of people that I grew up with, family and college friends and
Yeah.
Milana friends, and because of Orientistan, my personal page kind of started to grow with following, and I was like, and then as I was graduating, I was like, hey, like it was Ramadan, and I was like, I don't know how much people know, but like, hey, I can be here. Plus, like the Deobandi Hanafi perspective, not that the Deobandi Hanafi, not that the Deobandi perspective and the Hanafi perspective are different, but that here's the traditional take on Islam, and I don't think that was being articulated as much with millennial Muslims, and I was worried, right, because I saw, and I don't know how true this is. Again, globally, I don't want to speak for every country, every community, but just my own empirical experience was that I saw that a lot of imams who were speaking on social media were doing madhab hopping, and for me, madhab hopping is really egregious. And I know people will disagree with that, but that's my understanding that like each madhab is not even a school of thought. School of thought is a mistranslation. A madhab is a legal methodology. So when you combine a Shafi'i fatwa with a Hanafi fatwa, you're essentially combining two different ways of looking at the Quran and looking at the Sunnah. That's essentially taking a South African court case and using kind of French law or Egyptian law. Like it doesn't make sense, like methodologically, because there are different precedents, different ways of analyzing different. It's a different ontology of a system. And I was like, we need to make sure that we're kind of confined within our. So if you're Shafi'i, take the Shafi'i ruling. I'm not saying that we all need to become Hanafi. I would never advocate for that. I'm not a Hanafi purist, but I'm just saying that we need to be consistent in our way, because that's how Imam Abu Hanifa was, that's how Imam Shafi'i was, that's how Imam Malik was, radiallahu anhum ajma'in, that they were all consistent in the way that they analyzed Islam, and it was all logically coherent, right? It was we don't have a scattered tradition.
So everything all the fiqh you give is pretty much Hanafi, it. That's the thing. I can just forward it on Instagram to like all my friends and be like, "This is the ruling. Like, don't even worry about anything else." Like it makes it very straightforward, because from the subcontinent we're like a quarter of the world anyway. So like it's so immediately applicable to like 80% of my friends, right? Because they're all like Indian and stuff. So it just makes it really easy to sort of forward that sort of stuff. Like whenever you post like a new fiqh that like is like, wow, like we really didn't know about that, I just forward it to everyone.
That's really kind. Thank you guys for the support.
In terms of just, I guess, the whole idea of, I guess, Instagram, would you say that you're sort of operating in a more niche space, or do you feel that even like, non subcontinental folks, or maybe perhaps other ethnicities like Arabs and stuff are also relating to yourself? Like, what's your sort of response from that angle?
Yeah. So I would say my following is probably 60% South Asian, Indian, Bangladeshi, Pakistani, and then I would say about 30% are Arabs, mostly Levantine or Egyptian Arabs, and the rest are either Iranians, Turks, or Afghans, or Black Muslims. And I would say that they have been pretty receptive, but I hope I tried to make it clear in the beginning that, look, I was like, hey, I'm giving the rulings for the Hanafi madhab. The Shafi'i ruling might be different, and when I know the Shafi'i fatwa I give, I say I'm obviously not qualified to give fatwa in the Shafi'i fiqh, but I'm like, this is what I know to be the Shafi'i ruling. But I don't know every Shafi'i or every Maliki ruling in the way that I do the Hanafi. But I would say it's been pretty receptive. I would say just the only thing I can be, because of my like past and memeing, I can be sometimes a little abrasive when it comes to Arabs or Pakistanis or Iranians or Turks, and kind of make fun of some of their practices with Islam. But I mean, I try to do that with all ethnic groups that I'm fair. So like there is some pushback because of like people are kind of drunk on nationalism today, that like when they see an Indian, I mean, I'm half Indian, half Pakistani, but when they see a Desi Muslim critique Arabs, they're like, who does this Desi Muslim think he is to critique us? Like the Quran was revealed in our tongue, and the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam was sent to our people. So I've seen a little bit pushback, but that's been like less than % of that, where it's just been like an Arab or even an Iranian kind of their own kind of prejudice towards South Asians, and the fact that they feel like they're more authentically entitled to Islam than us, just because, by virtue of the fact. I don't even know what their reasoning is. I don't even, like, what would an Iranian see why they're more entitled to Islam than us? I don't know. I think like I had a lot of my non-Desi friends growing up probably thought a lot of us just to be like some like pseudo form of Hindu. I don't know. I don't know. But yeah.
Yeah, just also noting, like, on the your Instagram page, like, you make a lot of like very specific in jokes that, like, I'm like, I don't follow all of this, but this is really cool. Like when it comes to like, because I'm a BA as well, history and philosophy, so I understand a lot of the academic jokes. I get it, but a lot of your madrasa jokes and like your about like Deoband and stuff, it's really hard to follow, but I'm like, okay, I'm down for this, even though I don't get it.
No, I try to be egalitarian with my humor, try to appeal to all populations, and just whatever makes me laugh in the moment, I try.
Yeah, like the ones about like the like Arab ones, like about like I don't know how the different ethnicities like have beef with each other, or I don't know. I don't get a lot of it, but with Instagram, would you say it's allowed you to access and have that sort of relatability with people that you wouldn't have otherwise? It's sort of the medium of our generation, because everyone's on Instagram, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. And like, because obviously Instagram is a much more millennial social media, that it does allow for a much stronger engagement with millennial Muslims who otherwise, because like I don't, and like I'm not saying that this makes me better or anything, but like I just don't know of any other Deobandi Hanafi. Actually, there is one. His name is Mufti Wasim. I actually know him from South Africa, but he kind of does this stuff too. But I think also I was fortunate because I had all these friends from college who were kind of just Muslim by name, or not that practicing, and it was nice to kind of have them engage with this, even though a lot of them might not disagree. Like I have friends from college who are like, when Muslim Persian poets talk about wine, they're being literal, so therefore wine is permissible, and I'm just like, no, that's not. It's all metaphorical. These are all like verses of ecstasy and engaging with Allah Subhanahu wa Taala and His beloved prophets. But yeah, no, I mean, like I will receive some pushback, for example, where like academically, people will push back, which is fine, because I mean, ultimately, like they're not coming from like the same base. But I am glad that at least like one side of this is shown, because otherwise, like I would be fine with not telling people this, right? Like I would be fine with living my life without necessarily receiving kind of like backlash, or for kind of just telling what Islam is, because then people are like, like, why do you get this, like typical argument that's like, oh, like Islam is whatever a Muslim think it is, but it's thinks it is. But I'm just like, dude, if that were the case, then like literally what is the purpose of revelation? What is the purpose of like Quranic mandate? What is the purpose of the prophetic mandate? What is the purpose of the Sahaba mandate? So it's actually not that. But if I can at least get those ideas out there, then at least that idea is out there. And again, innama alayka al-balagh, as Allah told the Prophet, that your job is only to kind of convey the message, and as inheritors of the Prophet, that's it. Like we're not obliged to force anyone to believe anything, but we are kind of required to ensure that like whatever we know to be the truth, to essentially ensure that like that truth is out there in the marketplace of ideas.
Yeah, definitely. Like even just to add, like with like your Instagram, like for me, it's like if I'm like chilling out in my bedroom or something, I'm just like going through your story. It's like not only am I getting an idea of culture, but I'm also getting a deep understanding of your fiqh, like the rulings for Hanafi, madhab, and why this and that. And I think like it's such a more digestible way of learning a bit about your deen without it being in a more maybe rigid manner that we may have been used to, if that makes. I'm not saying that's the way to learn Islam, but I'm just saying like in the sense of chilling out, kind of you're not seeing Islam as okay, every time I learn about Islam I have to be I don't know, on a desk and studying hard and stuff. You get what I mean? Like I can also chill out, be relaxed, and just kind of understand things as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
If that makes sense. So like that's kind of what I vibe with your page as well.
Yeah, no, thank you. And and like again, it just comes back to the fact that like this is actually how our past was. That like if you were a Muslim who lived in Mughal India, like you got access to all of this, right? Like poetry was something that was taught in our madrasa, both Arabic and Persian, in Madaris in North India, Bengal, or in what is present day Punjab, or even in South India. Like all of that was critical, right? And because so previous scholars who are authoritative, right? If Imam Ghazali was someone who's this authority on deen, if he himself studied poetry and he himself studied history, and like that was critical to his kind of educational formation, then like why shouldn't it be as critical to us?
Yeah, I actually wanted to pivot towards poetry right now and ask you a bit about that, because of how crucial it is to, I don't know, our previous generations that we really have no clue about, living as like, I don't know, orphans of modernity in the Western countries. Like we have no idea how significant it was for our ancestors and stuff, because I feel like Islam on a formal educational level was maybe a bit restricted in the past. Say like if you were from like a wealthy or elite family, or you had access to that. For example, my ancestors in the village in Bangladesh, they wouldn't not all of them would have had access to, I guess, formal Islamic learning, but they all lived in a sphere where sort of like poetry was very common. Like it was like very, very like in day-to-day conversation, people would just reference poetry and lines, and a lot of that was the moral and Islamic basis of society.
Absolutely.
That's something we don't really connect to, I guess, in this day and age. And I just wanted your thoughts on that, about how, because it's a lot of what you post about as well. And the thing is, like, I set aside time in the day. I'm like, whoa, Salah just posted like 20 stories. I'm gonna have to sit down and go through this. But then it's like it becomes over 24 hours. I'm like, damn, I missed it.
No, yeah, no, don't. Yeah, let me know if like there's a story they want me to be highlighted. I'm bad at highlighting stuff, so if there's a story that like you feel like you don't have time to watch, let me know, and like I will make sure that I highlight it.
Yeah, thanks. So we'll definitely let you know. But just going back to like how you feel like poetry should be brought back, and just run us through that, like the significance you found in that as a part of your Islamic
Yeah,
learning.
so I grew up in a household. Again, my father was Tablighi. My mom came from like militant secular family. They found their peace somehow, but culture wasn't necessarily a big part. My mom only spoke English. My father only spoke English as well. I mean, he could speak Urdu, but we only heard English at home. And then when I went to Madrasa, Madrasas, even their instruction of poetry has become extremely reduced. But I remember chanting on Iqbal Shikwa, and I know I post a lot about Iqbal. So any of my talk on poetry will always discuss Iqbal what because of my own personal relationship with him and how he has affected me. And I would argue much of my own Persian study is directly a result of his engagement as someone who was a reformer of the ummah and someone who carried the pain of what it meant to be like as you so beautifully mentioned, as an orphan of modernity. And I think he's one of the first people who was able to articulate that well. Um, but yeah, no, I think poetry has always been a critical, because and unfortunately, because again in the Western world we think of philosophy and poetry as two separate spheres. But Maulana Rumi is truly, may Allah have mercy on him, but is truly one of the greatest philosophers of our era, and he only wrote poetry, right? The Masnavi, Divan Shams Tabriz, and Fihi is a prosaic work, but most of his thought is in poetry, right? Because these people were like literally, when they were talking about Allah, God, and the Prophet, and Islam, and the Deen, they were literally in ecstasy. And the only way they felt that they could accurately convey that was via the medium of poetry. So poetry has always been, and as you rightly mentioned, your ancestors. I was talking to my friend who's Bengali from Fremont, and he was talking about how his grandfather could, he's from Dhaka, and he was talking about how his grandfather. So this is British India, East Pakistan era, how his grandfather could essentially quote Hafiz, like the Persian poet, off the top of his tongue. That's
Yeah.
wild, right? Like someone, and my grandparents couldn't do that, but I know my great grandparents could probably do that. Where like like these like Iranian or Afghan or Indian Persian poets were just readily memorizing the Gulistan and the Bustan, which means the garden, by Saadi Shirazi, was this kind of like ethical didactic work that was instructed across the Muslim world, from the Balkans to Bengal, to use Shahab Ahmed's terminology. But so like Hafiz, Saudi, so like your ancestors, my ancestors would have easily related just on the fact of just Persian poetry, which is like so crazy to think about because we've been so divorced from that culture, and like poetry is a medium of informing your way of living and acting in the world, right? That this poetry always had lessons, but it always had a way of moving your spirit in a way that like a fifth text could never. Like in the way like
Yeah.
Persian or Bengali or Urdu or Arabic poetry or Turkish poetry could move your soul in a way that a fifth text could not. It could give you a love of the faith and the Prophet in the way that a fifth text could not, in the way that a seventh text could not. So it was a way of kind of letting I remember my philosophy professor in college. He said that the reason why these Islamic philosophers like Ibn Sina and al-Ghazali and Farabi, they always use the metaphor of wine, because even though they had people like Imam Ghazali and Maulana Rumi and Shams Tabriz and other great Sufis of our past, may Allah have mercy on them, the reason why they always use stuff like wine, because they could not literally articulate what it meant to experience pleasure of the divine, that they had to use a metaphor. And the simile that he gave was that when you taste something super super spicy, you're never gonna say that it was just spicy. You're always gonna say that like it was like really hot, right? Like we automatically use a metaphor there, in different types of experiences. So like imagine like when you engage with like the zat or the entity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and like how you're demanded to use this like lyrical ecstasy.
Yeah, that's really really profound stuff. Like I was recently reading Muhammad Assad's Road to
Yeah.
Mecca, and he's talking about how it's a Arab village that's Hail. I think it's in the middle, like literally in the middle of the desert. He's like, that's where the most authentic Arabs are from, and he's just sitting down with a group of men, and then one of them references
Yeah,
Mutanabbi, who's a 10th century Islamic
yeah,
poet, and he just reflected on that for a bit. He's like, look at this, like this illiterate man in the middle of the desert. He's
yeah,
referencing one of the greatest Arabian poets, and he knows the verses and how it applied to a particular situation. And he's like, imagine that happening in the West. That would never happen. He was like a Bavarian or German peasant quoting Goethe, or like a English peasant quoting Mary Shelley or something like that,
yeah,
or stuff like that. He's like, they're not in touch with their intellectual heritage like Muslims are across the world.
yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. And it's like, and I'm reflecting a lot more on this statement by Iqbal where he says that the prophet is essentially a creative spirit where he comes and he inspires a civilization, and how that prophetic spirit is obviously emanating from the divine, from the lahut, from the malakut, and but then talking about how itself and like Arabic being the kind of the language of poetry in the late antique, early classical period, and how obviously the spread of Islamic values happened, but this kind of this emphasis on poetry comes with the Quran too, which is like so insane, right? That you have obviously the Quran and
Yeah,
Arabic also spreads, but Persian, the ghazal is not native to Persian, let alone Urdu or Bangla. It is native to Arabic, right? So the rubai that is not native to Persian. That is native to Arabic. So with the attendant spread of Islam and the Quran and the Prophet's message and the Deen, you also have the spread of this love of poetry, which like comes and and it's a beautiful reflection made by a fall that this Persian heritage, or sorry, that this poetry heritage, what is also kind of like a direct result of like the prophetic spirit. That those are words, those are my words, not his, but that was kind of like my meaning that I took from him.
who are you referencing? Sorry, is this
No,
Assad
this is
or
Muhammad Iqbal. Yeah,
Muhammad Iqbal? Sorry,
yeah,
Iqbal.
yeah,
Okay, I didn't catch you. Yep, that's what he's saying. And I remember one of your recent Instagram posts. You're talking about how um, because the Arabs were materially impoverished, they had the richest language possible. As in,
yeah.
that's how Allah made it
I
be.
wrote that. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the reason
I
why,
wrote.
not the reason why. One of the wisdoms why.
Yeah, yeah. I wrote that in this kind of lyrical
Yeah,
prose
one of the
piece.
reasons why Islam came about in that particular place. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad that you're reading my. Yeah, I'm
go on.
honored that you're reading. Yeah, I've been kind of trying my hand at like prose or like this kind of poetry prose recently. But yeah, I mentioned that in there that I was like, because the Arabs were so poor, or the language, the Arabic language was as rich as the Arabs were poor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because that's what a lot of people don't understand. Like, dude, like a religion, like in the desert,
Yeah,
like at the
yeah,
1400 years ago, like why would that be for all time? Like, there's that lack of relatability, especially in like the Western modern
yeah,
world where we have literally the world is so different, and like it's just that
yeah,
sort of
yeah, yeah.
I don't know that double mind. You're like how like you just it doesn't feel like it's applicable to you, but no, this is like where the truth
Yeah,
comes from.
no, and it's so crazy because when the Europeans came into our countries, right, in India, Algeria, Egypt, Syria, Arabia, Yemen, they could not fathom why a people with such a glorious past like the Iranians could love an Arab man from Mecca. Why Indians with such a glorious 5,000 year past of Sanskrit XYZ could love could go love and follow a man from the desert, right? They literally could not fathom that, right? They were just like, what, like you Iranian or you Indian or you Turk has such a glorious past that why are you guys so obsessed with like this man? And not didn't use the word obsessed, but they were just like they follow this man from like a desert, and then they would go on, and then or like that argument would inform the fact that like these people are backwards, right? The fact that like and for an Orientalist, for them they could never escape the fact that like that these people follow a man from the. I mean, Mecca is not a desert, but it's also not like like Isfahan. So whatever, whatever,
Yeah.
like urbane city that that it was. But they were just like, how is that possible, right? Like how could a man inspire so much kind of like poetry, art, architecture, all of that, right? Like when you go to Taj Mahal, when you go to like different like civilizational masterpieces from the Balkans or even all the way to Indonesia from West Africa, you see the Prophet's name on all of that, peace and blessings upon him. And so
Yeah.
it's and for them, I think it was like almost inconceivable because at least Jesus, peace and blessings upon him, came from Jerusalem, right? Which is like a Roman kind of like Latin Greek city, but like our prophet, peace and blessings upon him, came from Mecca, which like had no history, or they would call it prehistorical in a sense.
Yeah, like I went to the Taj Mahal 2 years ago. I went to India with my family, and it's the most stunning thing. It's like you've seen the posters of it, but it still doesn't do it justice. But you go up close, right, and you see across the whole building, like all over it, verses of the Quran and Arabic. And this was our civilization. It's like this was the centerpiece. It's like this massive Arabic writing all across it.
Yeah, no. And my teacher talks about this a lot. How wahi or revelation is a civilization, which is like so wild to think about, right? Like what does that mean? Like how? Like what do you mean? Like divine inspiration? Like the prophet's revelation is somehow a civilization? Like what does that mean? Because it's like, dude, every single statement of the prophet inspires, like has inspired a certain cultural ethos, right? Just like the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said one hadith about sadaqah jariyah, which is like enduring charity that lives on after you die, right? That you build a madrasa or you build a well, that the rewards of that come into your account on the day of judgment in your hisab. But the Prophet only made one hadith about that, right? The Prophet said 3 things endure after your death, or 3 ways of gaining good deeds come after your death. Amalun sadaqah jariyah, waladun salih, so continuous charity, a pious son, and I'm forgetting the 3rd thing. But just like that one phrase of sadaqah jariyah inspired the entire institution of waqf, of legal endowments, right? So like majority of the masajid that are built in the Mughal era, whether in Chittagong or Delhi or Lahore, are built from waqf, right? Just one statement of the Prophet inspired that, right? But it also just wasn't masajid. The madaris, the educational institutions were often waqf. The public facilities, the hammam, the bathhouses, the roads, the wells, like the paved roads, all of that came from waqf just by one statement of the Prophet. So which is like so fascinating, right?
Yeah, I wanted to quickly ask you about, you mentioned you called the Prophet ﷺ the Arab prophet, and you actually broke it down on Instagram once. Just for our listeners and just for us again, like why do you call him the Arab prophet? Like what is the significance of that? Because I remember you said it's quite deep in a way.
Yeah. So I originally encountered it in the poem of Iqbal, and whoever listens to this, if you haven't read Iqbal's Shikwa, which is a complaint to Allah about essentially Muslims in modernity, right? And it's
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have read it, but that I have never read a piece of literature other than Revelation that has moved me in such a way, and it I think articulates the pain that I think me and you discuss about like what it means to be Muslim in encountering Western hegemony. But he says this one line where he says, "Ay Allah, tujhku chora ya Rasul Arabi ko chora." That, oh Allah, for this condition that we suffer vis-a-vis colonialism, has this happened because we've left you or the Arab prophet? And just so like that line itself was like really, really beautiful. So he's talking about like, first, oh Allah, did we leave you or the Arab prophet? Did we leave Salman al-Farsi? Did we leave Bilal Habshi? Did we leave Layla? Did we leave Majnun? Like why? Like literally, like why are we going through this? Like tell us, right? And he's complaining to Allah, kind of taking from the verse in the Quran where Yaqub alayhi salam complains about Yusuf alayhi salam's loss to Allah, which is قال إنما أشكو بثي وحزني إلى الله. That, oh Allah, I ashku. It's like the first person present tense of shikayat, of complaining. Oh Allah, I complain to Allah I complain about my sins to him. So there is Quranic precedent that Iqbal is employing. But so he said that like the Arab prophet, that Allah, have we left you or the Arab prophet? And then I explored that term more, and I had found that like other people, other poets had used it. Farid ibn Abbad calls the prophet the Saqi Arabi, the Arab cupbearer. For me, I think it's really important to emphasize who he was. I mean, I also just like to put like the kind of geographical signifiers on everyone. I do that for any poet that I say. I'll say the Iranian poet or the Afghan poet or the Turkish poet or the black intellectual or the black poet. And I do that, and I was just like, wait, like why don't I do that for the Prophet? Like the Prophet was literally Arab. Allah talks about him in the Quran.
Yeah.
Allah says this verse, وَلَوْ أَنزَلْنَاهُ قُرْآنًا أَعْجَمِيًّا لَقَالُوا لَوْلَا فُصِّلَتْ آيَاتُهُ أَعْجَمِيٌّ وَعَرَبِيٌّ. That if we had revealed the Quran in non-Arabic, then they would have said that how come these verses have not been made clear or manifest? أَعْجَمِيٌّ وَعَرَبِيٌّ, an Arab prophet and a non-Arab, an Ajami Quran. How does that make sense? Allah Himself does refer to him as like the Arab prophet. And I think for me, especially like how for us to kind of reinvestigate why the Prophet was Arab, why the Prophet had to be sent to the Arabs, I think is really important. I know I have definitely, I feel like I received the most pushback and backlash for that because obviously people don't, because people are nationalists, right? People want to feel that like their people are the greatest people in the world, right? Turks want to believe that like the Turks are the greatest. Egyptians want, right? Syrians, Palestinians, and especially in today's world, we're living in this like kind of post-nationalist world. Not even post-nationalist, still very much nationalist. And so for me, I was like, hey, first of all, we need to like get rid of our nationalism, right? Like the Prophet was Arab. So what? Like so what? Like why is that offensive to you? Right? Like, okay, fine. Like you're Iranian, you're Indian, or you're Pakistani, you're a Bengali. Like, but if the Prophet was Arab, why does that matter? Right? Like, so like that means that there's a deeper illness of nationalism in your heart that you need to address. That if you have an issue following someone who's not from your ethnicity, that's a problem. And for Iqbal saw that the new idols for Muslims in modernity, the biggest idol, obviously after the West, but specifically was nationalism, that Muslims were getting drunk on nationalism.
SubhanAllah.
Yeah.
I wanted to quickly add as well, like I think you did a talk where it was a short talk, and you mentioned that in the Eurocentric sort of world we live in, words sort of any word goes, other than the fact that if it's harassment, then they kind of shun it to an extent. But anything goes. But Islam, within Islam, you mentioned it's completely different when it comes to speech. Would you be able to just expand on that a bit more? Because I think it relates to kind of what you're talking about now.
So like are you talking about like free speech in Islam, or like what is Islam like?
Yeah, I think more in relation to free speech, but it would be more of kind of free speech, but I would assume as well it kind of may tie into the conversation we're talking about, like poetry, how I know our ancestors were sort of incorporating poetry into the way they speak, and perhaps that's kind of in relation to perhaps in the West it's not necessarily the case as well, but also in terms of free speech as well.
I'm not sure if I understand. So are there two related? Because I'm kind of seeing them as like two very different things.
Okay, because in the talk, what you mentioned is that free speech in the West is kind of it all is it's a free for all essentially. Is there a sort of standard?
You're talking about the Jummah khutbah that I gave. Okay, no, I got
it.
Sorry. I was like, what? I was like, I try to stay away from constitutional law, but I was definitely not an expert there. But
because you mentioned specifically, because you said like Islam is different, and you kind of went to your next point when it comes to speech, but you didn't elaborate on it. So that's why I was kind of curious. So because we're talking about speech and poetry now, I was wondering if that was connected to it. So that's why I wanted your thoughts as well on that.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a really good point. Exactly. So like in Islam, like for example, I don't know if you guys are familiar with like American like TV hosts like Bill Maher, or however you pronounce his name, or Steve Colbert, Trevor Noah. Different people are like, like as long as you're not harassing someone, it's not hate speech, it's fine. It's literally not in Islam how it works. And backbiting is hate speech in Islam, right? Like slander is hate speech in Islam. Lying is hate speech in Islam, right? So it's again it's literally a different conception of what speech is, right? That like, and it's also kind of understanding that speech is not arbitrary, right? Because in the secular world, because it's this cleavage of the Cartesian distinction, that well, as I offended him, sure, but it wasn't hate speech, so it's fine. Well, actually, no, because your soul was affected, so you actually harmed yourself, and you harmed him. You harmed his heart, right? So like when I offend a fellow Muslim brother or sister, I'm that is hate speech in Islam, right? Because my first of all, my soul is impacted because I've committed a sin, right? I've broken his heart, and the Prophet said that breaking a heart of a Muslim is worse than breaking the Kaaba, right? And obviously, like not actually literally, like, right? Destroying the Kaaba would be a terrible thing, but this is the kind of the kind of emphasis that's put on the good words that we speak, right? Allah says in the Quran, "Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu taqullaha wa qulu qawlan sadida." So speak straight things. Don't speak like these like curvy, twisted things, right? The fact that like again, it's a different conception that like in the secular world, our tongue is ours. In the Islamic sense, we don't. Coming back to that tattoo thing, we don't own our body. We don't own our tongue, right? We're going to be liable for it in the way that we use it. In the same way that if someone were to give collateral of an item in a financial transaction like rahan, how you use that item will be reflected. Like you do, like if you harm that item, you do have to pay. You do have to kind of recompensate him, or or give restitutions for that. So it's in Islam, like it's very important to understand that, because again, just because secular Twitter, Instagram, everyone tells us, or even like the news tells us that, hey, as long as it's not hate speech. But even then, like the label of hate speech is so arbitrary, right? Like in the Western world, like that itself, like there's so much slippage and confusion in that term. Like there's so much debate in constitutional law. Like we had a class at Columbia literally called the First Amendment or on free speech, because it's like that term itself is so loaded and so charged and so debated that it's just not clear, right? Like what that actually means. Like why do people get to insult the Prophet, peace and blessings upon him? Like why do people get a free pass there, knowing the fact that insulting the Prophet historically was linked to actual physical violence against Muslim bodies. So there is actual linkage of violence there. So people forget that. So obviously we reject anti-Semitism and we reject all prejudices, but it's like why is it when it comes to Muslims valuing their Prophet there's an issue? And for a Muslim, right, that we love the Prophet more than our own parents, as the hadith comes in Sahih Muslim, right? That we love the Prophet more than our own parents. And for someone, but the Western world doesn't understand that, right? Because for them, Jesus became a god, right? And because Jesus became a god, that means that like that they could kind of deal and then because it became secular. So first Jesus became a god, and then the world became secular, so they rejected God. So Jesus became a plaything in their imagination, right? Which is sad, because he's one of the 5 greatest prophets that we believe in, and to see him being mocked like he is in the Western world is also a tragedy for us, right? But like we don't have the power to do anything about that, but we can still at least defend the honor of our Prophet, peace and blessings upon him, and we have to explain that reality to the world, right? The fact that the Prophet is so critical to our conception of ourselves, right? That, like, and which is why the Christian world can never understand that, like how do these Muslims love a man so much without putting him on the same status as the divine, right? That like he's still a man, right? He's still a man to us. We never had the 4th century debates about Jesus, about does he have a divine reality or a human reality. He was always a human. There are debates obviously in Islam about Nur Muhammadiyya, or the light of the Prophet, but that's a different debate. Like the actual we know that the Quran tells us clearly that he is a bashar, he is insan, he is a human, he is adami, he is a human being, right? So sorry, I didn't mean to make this into the whole kind of
no, that was really good. Like just to tie back to poetry as well, specifically. Like,
and then
in terms of speeches.
Just really quickly, there's a Persian maxim. I meant to say that earlier, but there's a Persian maxim, a principle regarding poetry, where some poet, we don't know who the poet who created this principle said, he said, "Bakhuda divana bash, ba Muhammad hoshyar." That with Khuda, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you can be wild, like literally divana, right? I think you guys also have the word in Bangla, but like, right, like crazy, like wild, begana, like that thing. Ba Muhammad hoshyar, but like watch your tongue when it comes to the Prophet. So, which is why even in Persian poetry, like even in Persian poetry, like Mulla Rumi will kind of liken Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to like, I don't know, like a cupbearer pouring wine, or like an attractive female with black locks of hair, like that kind of thing. But nobody touches the honor of the Prophet. in poetry, and never kind of makes this kind of analogies, but they will do that with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because it's the kind of the fact that we all have that personal relationship with him, but with our prophet's honor, Allah himself has kind of safeguarded it. So when someone insults the prophet or does anything disrespectful, you're invoking or you're eliciting the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
And also that just also reminds me, like, I guess from the Western perspective, they don't understand that sort of love on that kind of dimension. So it's kind of hard for them to kind of relate, like even with the whole, free speech and poetry and everything, like I guess the Islamic tradition sort of talks about, like, not just even the fact that, speak good, but also like, rather keep silent. And if you need to speak, but make it, meaningful and purposeful. So even on the kind of concept of, like, I guess Islam and tying it with poetry and free speech, it's like, our tradition sort of forces us to be very precise. Like even like Rasulullah, like one of his benefits was one of his like skills or kind of his attributes was that he was able to speak about things succinctly. That it gets to the person, and they, it's said in a manner where they can understand it precisely. And even in like logic, like the whole idea within the study of logic is that it's about defining terms, so making sure that whatever you're talking about, the other guy that you're talking to is also understanding it. So I don't know what I was going with that, but the whole idea is that kind of in Islam we sort of talk about, being precise with our language, but also within poetry it's about creating that uplifting ourselves spiritually as well through words as well. So I guess that's the kind of weight we have when it comes to poetry, tying it in with how we speak, always being silent but being purposeful as well when we do speak. But something, I guess, it kind of ties into Orientalism as well. I actually don't know if they can kind of perhaps the West has sort of grasped this sort of perspective of how we define speech to be in the Islamic tradition. So that was kind of my thoughts as well, just adding to what you were talking about.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah. Saleeh, just to go back to Iqbal now, we just wanted to cover him in a bit more depth. So I went to Pakistan 2 years ago. Last year, because my wife's from Pakistan. And dude, like everything there is named after Muhammad Iqbal.
Yeah.
Like everything, like the airport and like all the roads. And like you realize how central he was to the people of Pakistan once you go there. And you mentioned the Jawab Shikwa, like that's probably one of the deepest things I've ever like listened to, because I listened to it in Coke Studios. But like when you go into the depth of the verses, it's like this is sort of the sentiment that, like, as an art student, as someone who's trying to understand your Muslim heritage, this is what you feel exactly. Like, what happened to us? Like, what did we do? Where did we go wrong?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I'm always down to talk about Iqbal. Just to kind of preface this with this, I do receive some DMs from Pakistanis, especially in Orientalism, where sometimes, or even like even sometimes Bengalis who are just like, why does this guy love Iqbal so much? Like, he's already known in Pakistan and India. I don't know how much in Bangladesh, but like in Pakistan and India, definitely. And he's already kind of consecrated and idolized. Like, let's talk about more subversive poets like Nazrul Islam or Sahir Ludhiani or Habib Jalib. But for me, it's like I think this is one of the blessings of the diaspora, that like we're kind of distant from like the Muslim homeland politics. And
definitely. Well, we don't have an idea of all that sort of like internal conflicts and stuff that's going on there.
Right. Yeah. So a lot of Pakistanis in Pakistan actually don't care for Iqbal because he's mainstream. Right. So it's not subversive or leftist or hip to quote Iqbal. And like, yeah, I've actually seen people tell me that. So, which is kind of saddening. But also, like, most people in Pakistan don't, or India or South Asia don't even know Iqbal well, because Iqbal didn't really articulate himself as forcefully in Urdu as he did in Persian, right? He wrote more in Persian than he did in Urdu. So his way of thinking is definitely much more manifest in Persian, and which is why I try to bring light to that. My interaction with Persian is mostly kind of just to understand the pain of the ummah that Iqbal felt and that he expressed in Persian. Like oh my God, he has a couple couplets in his Al-Mughani Hijaz, which means the gift of Hijaz, where he says, مسلمان فقیر کج کلاهی رمید از سینه او سوز آهی دلش نالد چرا نالد نداند نگاه یا رسول Allah نگاه. That a Muslim was a king and a Sufi so high, but now the flame in his chest has burned out. His heart often weeps, but he doesn't know why. A glance, O Prophet, a glance, O Prophet. And so it's like who in the early 20th century was articulating that pain? And I don't necessarily read him as a philosopher in as much as I would read Shah Waliullah or Imam Ghazali or even my own teachers, because he wasn't an alim, he wasn't an Islamic scholar. He did have some Islamic training. He did go to a small local madrasa, the kind of residual Mughal madrasas that had endured throughout India, that I'm sure your grandparents probably saw, but where like the local Molvi was teaching kids in a maktab system. And but for me, it's like Iqbal is someone who kind of captured the pain of that moment. We have a lot of Arab and Turkish poets at that time, but like they're not able, at least in my understanding or in my in my engagement with them, they were not able to articulate that pain as well. And it just seemed to be a lot more nationalistic, where the Arabs were more concerned about Arabs, or the Turks were more concerned about Turks, or Egyptians were more concerned about Egyptians, but it was like, or Arabness, but it was like for Iqbal, he literally did not care about that, right? Like he just wanted to see the Ummah rise again, and have that kind of sense of place and belonging in the world that they had for 1,200 years, continuously, since maybe the Mongol invasion. And for me, my engagement, because he's obviously very well read in our history and culture and architecture and literature, as well as in the Quran and the Hadith itself, so he's able to tie all of it together. So I would say that much of my work is kind of a weak or a mediocre representation of Iqbal.
Just to give the audience an overview, like what was Iqbal's sort of core sort of project? Like what was he trying to do for Muslims in that period of like the 1920s and so forth? Like what did he want us, like, because I guess he was the first one to sort of see where the world was headed at that period, with the modern world coming into shape.
Yeah, he was ahead of his crowd, like, subhanAllah. He's ahead of his times.
Yeah.
Like, what did he lay down for Muslims to sort of follow, and like how we should proceed in these sort of times?
And just to add, to Josh, do you think like amongst Bengalis, do you think Muhammad Iqbal is readily like talked about and read about? Like, I personally haven't found that to be the case, but it might be different for you.
Definitely in sort of more well-read circles. Like if you follow poetry, you'll definitely know Iqbal.
Of course, yeah.
But because Bengali, it's very like you only know Bengali, it's hard to have that crossover because we're a bit separated from the rest of the subcontinent.
It's because, like, why I bring that up, because, sorry, just to add in this random tangent, it's just because I felt like I think I had the theory of, I think because of, Iqbal was sort of promoting a sort of, I guess Pakistan. He didn't get to see it in action, but because I think, 1971 and all that, for Bengalis, it's kind of a way to, like, they find Iqbal as a figurehead of Pakistan, and since the sentiments of what happened in 1971 is still fresh, they may at times try to disassociate. And I'm talking about more of the wider Bangladesh society, but I might be wrong. Like, that's just like something I sort of thought about, because I personally haven't found out among Saleeh like them talking about Muhammad Iqbal and stuff. But that's just sorry, I just wanted to chuck that in.
Yeah.
But what was your sorry.
But yeah, Saleeh, just about Iqbal's core project and what he was trying to get us, what he was trying to tell Muslims of that time.
Yeah, so Iqbal's core project revolved around the concept of the khudi, which is selfhood. And it's really fascinating because khudi in Persian originally just meant like selfishness, because like you were of yourself. But for him, living in Western modernity, he thought that like Muslims needed to recapture their self, right? That like and like they should not kind of be intellectual slaves to the West. And I would say that was much more his project. So you don't necessarily see him talk about, I mean, he actually did serve as a politician, but for him, it was just like, what does it mean to have your entire tradition captured by the West, or paying homage to it? So for him, he talked a lot about raising yourself, right? That, like, raising yourself, and he uses the word ishq, which means love. But for him, ishq was not only just love, but it was always like, but it was also this concept of of seeing the world in a distinctly Islamic lens, where the body and soul are one, where the Prophet is a centerpiece of the universe, where someone is engaged with their tradition and they're still working on Islamic values. And which is why he says is in his Allahabad address in the 1930s, as Speaker of the Muslim League, he talks about how a Martin Luther could have never come about in Islam. That somewhat of Martin Luther who cleaved the material and the spiritual could have never came about in Islam, because that distinction could never have been proven in Islam, because the Quran is all about the fact that all of these categories are kind of collapsed into one larger cosmology. So he has this poem where he says, Faryad Afrang, Faryad Dilavezi Afrang, that I complain at the hands of Europe. Faryad Shirinio Parvezi Afrang, I complain because the conquering Europeans seem so sweet. Alam Hama Virana as Changezi Afrang. These Genghis Khan like Europeans have destroyed the whole world. Ay Mi'mari Haram, O architect of the Kaaba. Baz Batamir Jahan Khayz, rise up and repair this world. Ashabin Gana Khayz, rise up from your deep sleep. Right? So this idea that like you have to be aware of your own, literally it was about being aware of your own tradition and rebuilding the world in that lens. So that's why he calls the Muslim Mi'mari Haram, the architect of the Kaaba. But the Kaaba being a metonym of Islamic civilization, a metaphor for Islamic civilization. That just as the Prophet Ibrahim built the Kaaba with his son Ismail, alayhi salatu wasalam, we as Muslims built the civilization as paying honor to the prophets who preceded us.
Yeah, so I guess Iqbal was sort of ahead of his time then, because that's what scholars are talking about now, sort of reclaiming your own subjectivity, coming from your own basis of like not borrowing from the West. I think that's a very recent thing, but I guess Iqbal was the first one to lay that down for Muslims and say, look, we don't have to borrow from the ideologies or sort of the underpinnings of Europe in order to progress, in order to bring ourselves back, but we have to the selfhood, we have to rediscover that for ourselves in our Prophet Sallallahu and the Quran.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. And then again, I would say his second biggest thing was probably nationalism. So he gets into this debate with this actually Deobandi Maulana named Hussein Ahmad Madani, who essentially was arguing that like Muslims and Hindus were one people, and that he was essentially a believer of Indian nationalism. And then Iqbal writes this poem in response to it, where he goes, "Ajam hanuz nadana drumuzidin," that the non-Arabs are still ignorant to the secrets of their religion. Barnaza Deoband Hussein Ahmad in Chebul Ajabi. That otherwise, how strange is Mulana Hussein Ahmad from Deoband, right? Surud bar sare mimbar ke millat az vatana. He's saying that Iqbal's arguing in Persian about Mulana Hussein Ahmad Madani, that he's arguing in that Muslims have a physical territorial homeland, meaning that Muslims have a territorial nationalism, that our deen is somehow kind of contained in a physical location, right? And then he goes, Muhammadi Arabis, that how ignorant is he to the station of Muhammad of Arabia? You know, Suhaib az Rum, Salman as Faris, Bilal as Habsh, Bu Lahab as Makkah, in Chebul Ajabis. Salman came from Iran, right? Bilal came from Ethiopia. Suhaib came from Anatolia. But Abu Lahab, despite the fact of him being an uncle of the Prophet and being an Arab, he died a non-Muslim. He died a polytheist. He was Arab, right? But despite the fact, and then who do we honor? We honor the Iranian Salman al-Farsi. We honor the Ethiopian Bilal al-Habshi. We honor the Anatolian Suhaib al-Rumi, right? So for him, yeah. He was like, we need to disregard nationalism because nationalism will literally eat us alive. And we saw that, dude. And like we have seen this the past 100 years, where Muslim countries have kind of, drunk the wine of nationalism, and now they cannot necessarily see beyond that lens.
Yeah, 100%. It's really devastating when you reflect back on it, on sort of like how that's affected the wider ummah and how we've all become nationalists in a way. This sort of ties into something we wanted to ask you, as it's something you talk about quite often. So I thought we may as well go into it with regarding partition of India, Pakistan, and the sort of way as subcontinental Muslims we should view it or sort of understand the time. Because obviously, if you study any bit of history, you'll know about how bloody the period was and how just like tumultuous it was. It just didn't work out right. And you have your typical Pakistani Islamic
Yeah.
nationalist discourse.
Yeah.
Muslims needed their own space. This was necessary. And one thing especially is they look at what's happening in India now, and they're like, "See, we told you. Like Muslims should have had their own space." And like they retroactively sort of interpret what's going on now and say, "Oh, it was right for Pakistan to have been created." And then you have your Indian nostalgia as well. They're like, "Oh no, Indians are more so like they lament a partition as well because it could have been a more powerful India or something like that." But um, I wanted to ask you, so how would we view this period? Because aside from all the nationalist sort of lenses that people can't seem to drop, because I sort of noticed that evolution in your thinking as well because of how you've posted about it over the years. Um, there's some people would say Pakistan's a necessary creation, where you talked about Talal Assad. I think you said it would end up being a Hindu-dominated society anyway because of like uh, a supposedly secular society still ends up reinforcing the symbols of the majority or something like that. And but there's other perspectives as well where there's Abul Kalam Azad and his vision as well. So we're wondering if you could just go into that a little bit of like how we should view the time.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've also had my own journey with kind of the debate on partition. But yeah, I mean, it's tough. Like as a Muslim in the subcontinent, as someone who kind of um and like my father's Indian, my mom's Pakistani, so there was always like, well, there wasn't really that tension because both of my parents were not cultural at all, and they were kind of just Muslim. Being Muslim was like their only identity. So I like that debate actually never really poured into my home. But I will say that so I mean, like the debate is tough, right? I mean, because I mean, Iqbal makes a strong point in the 1930s that look, hey, that we have a whole system of living, right? And actually, what's really interesting, what Pakistani nationalists miss out in that speech, that Iqbal doesn't argue for a separate country. What he argues for is that for like all the Muslim majority regions, Kashmir, um, Sindh, Baluchistan, etc., all the Muslim majority regions, Punjab, that they should be allowed to cultivate their own culture with regards to Islam or in kind of relation to Islam. But he doesn't argue for a separate country, right? And so for him, the debate is that, look, hey, Islam is a whole system of living, right? Like Islam is not something, like the Prophet did not come so that Islam could be practiced in your home, right? Like the Prophet came with a creative spirit to bring a civilization, and Iqbal wanted that civilization to be cultivated. Obviously, we've seen Pakistan the past 70 something years, and that civilization, nobody would ever argue that like it's present there. but I think that was the vision. I think that's why it sold so well. Like imagine Muhammad Ali Jinnah, he would go to Bengali zamindars, right? He would go to like these like wealthy Muslim Bengali zamindars, or go to Muslim wealthy zamindar or landowners in Delhi or Lucknow or Hyderabad or Jaipur or Ajmer, and these former centers of Muslim power. And imagine someone, an Indian Muslim, a Gujarati Muslim, coming and telling you that, look, hey, you should leave your land and all your property and come and move to Pakistan to help develop Islam. And like if you were telling us, right, like if you were like, if someone if someone came and told us, like, would you have paid heed to him? Probably not. And like what's crazy is that a lot of Muslims did listen to him, right? Like Bengalis were on board, North Indians were on board, like a lot of wealthy Kashmiris of that time were on board with Jinnah's vision, which is like actually so wild to think about, right? That like for you to say like I'm willing to leave what generational wealth in Bengal, like some of these Muslim landowners in Bengal had been given that mandate by Babur, because Babur himself came and took Bengal, right? So these wealthy Bengali zamindars had that ruling mandate, especially in East Bengal that would have gone to India. They went and moved to Dhaka. They went and moved to Chittagong. Muslim wealthy zamindars living in West Punjab or East Punjab, like Ludhiana or Amritsar, they went and moved to Lahore, which is like so wild, right? So like that, so like there's a couple of things to think about that, like the fear of like Hindu domination must have been super palpable, right? For these people to like literally leave their mansions and leave their entire families or take their families with them and come and move from ancestral land to an entirely new city in which they didn't necessarily know anyone. So like I have to temper my own reflection on partition, thinking about that, right? Like, what did it mean to be a Muslim living at that time? Calcutta was a city that was 30-40% Muslim. Right now it's probably 5-10%, if that, right? So like these cities in which you have like, and Dhaka, Chittagong were more like 60% Muslim, 40% Hindu, right? So so for someone to go and like leave their ancestral home, just like was there an actual fear? And for us to invalidate that fear, I don't know how justified I am, when I did do that, right? Because it's like, like for you to leave that, who, like you don't do that except in the most extreme scenarios. So
true. But as a Bengali, reflecting on sort of what happened 1971, like Pakistan as well, like you see, like where is that Islamic spirit?
Yeah.
Where does that shine through? Do you know what I mean? As in, what was it for? Was it all to lead up to that? Like that's why I guess as a Bengali, from my perspective, we're a bit more skeptical. Like India was more a federation of different ethnic linguistic states in a way. Like we could have I see in one of your stories you mentioned, I was looking back at your highlights about how Abul Kalam Azad was talking about how they would have had a certain backing if India decided to remain united. Like we would have been like 30% of the country if it was like a united India, and we would have had the seats given to us where we would have been represented and had that basis where we weren't dominated. So that was a possibility. Not that we can talk about it now, but there was sort of like a way, I guess, where that could have happened, where India remained united and Islam had their own, the Islamic states had their own sort of power within their own federated systems or legislation, stuff like that.
I was just going to say that first of all, like Pakistani aggression against Bengali is absolutely unjustified and needs to be called out, needs to be recognized by Pakistanis, and I would be the last one to say that it shouldn't be, but that I think how do you then encourage kind of like this Muslim solidarity when you had Muslims who were essentially oppressing, massacring Bengalis in large numbers. So I don't know the answer to that, and it's like sad, but like I wonder if this just speaks to like the poor apparatus of like the early kind of Muslim politician state, where like you had people again who weren't necessarily trained in what it means to be Muslim, right? A lot of these people did not have like these people who committed massacres, and this is not to say that people who are trained in Islam are somehow not gonna commit violence. They do, and history has proven that. But like I'm saying that I think there's less of a chance when you teach someone kind of the ethics, when you have someone who's trained, when you have someone who's proven to be kind of bounded by the ethics of the Sharia. That's very different, right? Because we're still working off like a very kind of Western political apparatus where people are not trained in basic Islamic values. Right, so they're still working off this very Western secular way where like dissidents need to be killed. Wait, what? Like who taught you that? Right, like who taught you that like a rebellious population that needs to happen to them? So that would kind of be my answer. The answer to that like we need to have better leaders, right? We need to have leaders who are essentially trained and have that strong ethical foundation.
Yeah, like just to add to that, like even from my kind of upbringing, right? Like, I guess my parents were very, like, I think even like maybe Josh's parents and all that, like anything to do with Pakistan were so skeptical because of 1971. It's kind of, I guess people say, because it breeds, that reaction breeds a very staunch sort of Bengali nationalism, but I like it might be un-Islamic at times perhaps, but can I blame them? Like I can't. Like you get what I mean? So it's like sometimes we get that sort of, that's where the divide of culture versus Islam versus because we have so bad sentiments of what happened in 1971. So he's kind of dictated everything for us, and especially for my parents' generation. So it's very hard to sort of navigate that at times as well.
Yeah, no, it's definitely tough, and yeah.
Yes, well, and
But yeah, I guess partition is just one of those things where you can't really give a clear answer to. It's just always going to be tenuous depending on which part of the subcontinent you speak to. And
Right.
everyone's got their reasons, I guess. Like Pakistani people obviously have their reason, Kashmiri people have their own reasons to be against modern day India, I guess. But you really can't speak on how it would have panned out if things turned out different. And have you studied much into whether the British facilitated or encouraged the partition? As in, is that the end result they were pushing for in the discussions that were taking place?
So, yes and no. I would say that they definitely didn't do enough to like, kind of like stop it, but I guess because they were so jolted by like the violence. Like for example, in 1946, in Calcutta, and there was this kind of action day that happened where like thousands of Hindus and Muslims were killed.
Yeah, there was the riots. Yeah,
right, exactly, like the riots, and I think in that scenario, and like obviously it's super easy to talk about that now, like 70 years later, but like again, dude, who knows what like our great grandparents or great grandparents were thinking during that time, to like just see thousands of Hindus like to just be killed because you were a Muslim, or to have your house burned down in Calcutta just because you were a Muslim, must have been such a frightening time. So definitely, and for the British, they just kind of wanted an easy exit, and so they kind of rushed things really fast, and so borders were drawn really hastily, and because the process, so it was originally supposed to be done in 1948. Obviously, during the same time, debates on Israel Palestine are going on, so like the same, and they're both British mandates. Well, it is not British mandates; it's a full kind of occupied country. But so the debates are going on, and for the British, they essentially just want to peace out without any further backlash, and for them, the easiest way to do that was just to kind of give into the demands of the Muslims by separating them. But there definitely was a much better way of kind of addressing that problem, right? Of the Hindu-Muslim tension that was ongoing.
So alhamdulillah, like this was a great conversation. It was very insightful, and I hope like we can probably have more discussions like this in the future, inshallah. But we kind of asked this last question to our guests to wrap up the episode. For some, it's really hard question. For others, it's kind of very easy question. So I'd be interesting. I think I could guess who you would pick. But anyway, so the question is, if you had to pick 3 people to hang with in a cave, because boys in a cave, and it can be people from the past or present, or it can't be Sahaba or Rasulullah, because everyone was going to pick them, and we want a variety of answers. So who'd you pick?
That's actually pretty easy for me. So I'd pick Babur, Muhammad Zahiruddin Babur.
Yep.
I would pick.
And for the audience, can you just give a quick summary of who he is?
Zahiruddin Babur was the founder of the Mughal Empire in the Indian subcontinent. He was a fifth or sixth generation descendant of Timur, the Turkic king, or Tamerlane. He lost his kingdom thrice in Samarkand, and then went to Kabul, and then ended up taking Delhi from the Afghans, Ibrahim Lodi. And then his descendants would rule Delhi until 1857, when the last king, Bahadur Shah Zafar, is exiled to Burma. And he was a Turkic, Persian. He knew Turkic, Persian, and Arabic. He also translated an Arabic Hanafi Usul manual into Turkic, actually.
SubhanAllah.
So,
second person?
Babur, obviously goes without mention, but Malcolm. But I'm sure. Actually, don't put Malcolm. Or actually, definitely, put Malcolm. Malcolm.
And your last person?
It's gonna be Iqbal.
Yeah, I would have guessed that.
Yeah.
Alhamdulillah. That's a great variety. I think a lot of our guests do pick Malcolm as well. It's just influential, and even when like some of the things is just. I think you did the post about this recently as well. I can't remember, but it's just everything like he was talking about. Even the idea of police brutality and all that is like still happening in our times. Like subhanallah, like how things,
Yeah.
just
You
some
can
issues,
see that.
it's almost timeless.
But it's also just like how crazy how like the divine how like Allah's guidance for him, but also not just from like from prison to Nation of Islam or from Nation of Islam to Orthodox Islam, but also just like his the speech that he would say. It's like we know that like at some point it's like this is like divine kind of guidance pouring into him. Obviously we're not saying a stuff that like he revelation, but like we do believe that pious and righteous Muslims can have ilham or like divine inspiration. So, and that's something that you just see,
Definitely.
and for me, like that's really powerful, is to see like how Allah Subhanahu wa Taala manifests His kind of guidance in Malcolm and his acts or his speeches or just the kind of panorama of his journey.
Subhanallah. Yeah, subhanallah. I even try to, like, I don't know, because in this corona situation, just being self-isolated, so I've just been really thinking about, issues like these. Even thinking about Malcolm, like, I should buy him, I need to get his t-shirt. I don't even have a Malcolm t-shirt, so I ordered that. This is a random side point. But, yeah, like, subhanallah, like, it's just all the issues and everything they were addressing, even with Iqbal or Malcolm, people, like, they talked about things that were in the past, how are they relevant now, but they're just so relevant. Subhanallah.
And because it's like words from people who are divinely inspired or eternally relevant because they come from a higher source.
Definitely. Subhanallah. I was actually, I really enjoyed this conversation because I think I hope the audience kind of felt that, like, I guess, like, our age wouldn't be too much of a difference, like, wouldn't be too much of a difference between our ages, but at the same time, it's like we're able to sort of relate to sort of the things that we're going through. And then you're obviously, studying the madrasas and stuff and kind of relating it to, poetry, philosophy, and it's a very kind of unique conversation. Do you think there is, I guess, within the space that you're in, there is enough people doing this, or do you feel that it's probably not done as enough as would like it to be done?
No, I don't think it's done enough as I would like, which is why hopefully after I'm done with this Mufti course, which is the end of next year, inshallah, I want to be starting kind of courses,
inshallah,
in my local area as well as online, and just talking about fiqh and liberalism, or like poet or like Persian poetry within the subcontinent, and how poetry informs Islam, like an Islamic or moral ethical subjectivity. But yeah, I definitely want to make this more mainstream. We definitely don't have enough people talking about, because once we understand secularism, all these different kind of debates and issues that millennial Muslims confront with Islam, all of that just spills away. Once you understand how secularism or secularity conceives of the world and conceives of the human subject, once you understand that and how Islam pushes against that, then it just becomes so much easier, right, to talk about this stuff. But if you're forever just talking about each little point, you're never gonna win. You literally will never win. Like all the secular objections against Islam, you cannot win because you're working through two different systems, two different systems of thought, two different structures of thought, two different histories, two different entirely varied philosophies of thinking, living, existing, and acting and performing in the world.
SubhanAllah, that's so true. And inshallah, Mel, I'll make it easy for you to be able to achieve what you want to achieve, because that's something we definitely need. And we'll probably wrap it up there. But before I kind of wrap up the show, for the audience, could you give them perhaps your links to your social media, or whether they can perhaps check out your stuff or your content?
I would say either follow Orientistan at Orientistan, or my personal account at Saaleh Baseer. Orientistan, I just do more poetry and history. But my personal account, I try to do more of the fiqh stuff that I'm doing, or just kind of tongue-in-cheek memes of different Muslim populations. But so you can kind of catch me with those two places. But thank you so much for this. Had a really great time. You guys definitely enhanced my understanding of these topics. It was really fun to throw these ideas and to kind of see them marinate with you, and then to be thrown against me too. So that was a lot of fun. If I want to tell people to listen to your podcast, how do I? So just Boys in the Cave. Where do they find your podcast?
Yeah, so we're on we're literally everywhere. So SoundCloud, YouTube, Spotify. Stitcher, iTunes. So you just search up Boys in the Cave. Like I've said this before in the past, where because of the Thai boys. Do you remember that situation where Thai boys got trapped in the cave and it was big media coverage on that? Yeah. So because of that, we're like, our Google search became down. So just search Boys in the Cave podcast on Google, it will come up, inshallah. So that's kind of how, if you want to hear our content. But even with your social media links, I'll put them in the show notes so people can check them out. But big Jazakallah khair to you coming on. It was really an honor, and I've been following your content. As you can tell, Josh was the one that got me hooked onto your content. He was really, you can tell, like, he's alhamdulillah, because he's really kind of he has that cultural vibe. He loves reading about Orientalism, Indian history, so that's why his kind of passion for that always oozes out. So that's why that's why I was spamming you on Messenger. Yeah. That's pretty much why. So hopefully it wasn't you didn't come across as too in a bad manner.
No, dude, and like I'm super sorry about that. I just school was going on, and I'm in like so many.
I was just look back from my end, so I just hoped you didn't look too bad.
You're fine, and I'm really glad we got to have this conversation. But yeah, because of the whole Corona thing, I mean, everything is on pause, so I was like, this needs to happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, I hope
definitely.
I hope if I said anything wrong, please forgive me. Make dua for me. But yeah, inshallah, it was definitely great talking to you guys.
Yeah, inshallah, for sure. Yeah, likewise. And you may notice, for the audience, Josh has kind of dropped out of the line. That's why it's just me now. But we'll probably wrap it up there, inshallah. So for our listeners, thank you for giving us your attention. If you have any questions or queries, feel free to email us at info@boysinthecave.com. And you may have noticed, I guess, this episode was a bit midway. It's because usually the co-hosts, me and Josh, are together when we record with our guests. Because of the whole Corona situation, it's things on pause, so we're trying to do it all remotely. So I guess apologies if things, I think a few times in the middle I kind of just butted in and kind of added to the conversation. We wasn't kind of related. It's usually because when we're together, things are flowing. But inshallah, I still hope a lot of benefits to be derived from this episode, inshallah. And if you wanted to support our project, you can do so on Patreon. So go patreon.com/boysinthecave, and you can hop onto our WhatsApp group if you donate $5 a month, inshallah. So from our special guest Saaleh Baseer and myself and Josh as well, we wish you all the best. This is Tanzim signing off. Assalamu alaikum.